All right, testing the mics. Dan or Di, if you can hear me, please raise your hand.
We'll call the Assembly of the Whole Committee to order for August 28th. And I'm going to look down the row. Who's looking at me? Ms. Bryson, could you do the land acknowledgement?
Yes, Madam Deputy Mayor, we would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Ganeshish.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. The clerk will note the roll. Everyone's here except for Ms. Wall. Ms. Hale is on Zoom. Any changes to the addenda, Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Yes, under new business, we are going to add resolution 3034 that the Public Works Committee brought up this afternoon.
Thank you. So that was passed out to everyone. You guys have a copy. We'll add that at the end. So that's item 6, 3034. Great. So approval of minutes from the December 19th meeting. Any comments about the minutes from the last committee of the whole? Hearing none, those are approved. So we have 5 agenda topics. Each can take a while. So we'll give it a go and see what happens. The first is the science of a yokelup. We have a distinguished panel with us who made a presentation for us. And we'll go to them first. Included in the panel is Mr. Watch. He'll be at the end. But we have Jamie Pierce from the USGS, Aaron Jacobs from the National Weather Service, and Dr. Aaron Hood from the University of Alaska Southeast. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Thank you for doing this for us, and go for it. And we will ask you questions. Are you comfortable with in the middle if someone wants to ask you anything? Anytime. Okay. I
have one tech question.
Press the button so that your microphone is green. And
I'm keeping my Zoom muted and talking through here. Is that right?
you don't need, is there a reason you're on your Zoom? You don't need to be.
What's that?
You don't need to be on Zoom.
No.
Oh, he's to share his screen. I see. Okay, right on. So what's your question, sir? Sorry again.
Should I speak through Zoom? Like I'm muted on Zoom. Should I unmute myself?
No, mute yourself on Zoom and talk on the microphone.
Okay, I can speak loud.
And please, there you go. Turn on your, thank you for being the tech support.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen over there, which will hopefully work. And we just have a couple slides just to orient you to Suicide Basin. I know there's sort of varying levels of familiarity with the outburst flood.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can people hear? No. Okay.
Right.
Please put your microphone closer to your mouth and make it so you can hear yourself talking.
All
Because
right. How about now? Does that work?
all right, we have fans going, so it's hard for folks.
Okay.
Thanks.
So let me just press full screen and see if I can get this. Okay. So basically, we're just going to give you a really quick tour of the basin for those of you that aren't familiar with where the flood originates, talk to you a little bit about the science, and then a little bit about kind of what we know and don't know and what we need to know moving forward. So to start out, just to orient you to our location, if you were to go to the visitor center and you were to fly in a helicopter, just maybe 2 miles up the glacier, the first sort of side basin on the right, that's Suicide Basin right there. So that's where the flood is originating. This is a side glacier, the Suicide Glacier that used to come down and flow into Mendenhall. And so if we look back in time, we can see how we got here in the first place. So if you look at this photo from 1893, the Suicide Glacier was flowing down and adding ice to Mendenhall. If we move forward about 120 years, the glacier has retreated back up that cliff. And what it did is it left an over-deepened basin, which the main glacier is now creating an ice dam in front of. So the basin has bedrock on 3 sides and an ice dam, which is the Mendenhall Glacier, on the front side. If we move
Dr.
back,
Hood,
yes.
Just to be clear, could you go back? The water is not, go back a slide. Is next to the Mendenhall Glacier, not up where the Suicide Glacier
No, so
arrow
that's-
is.
Well, the melt from there, that flow is filling the basin. So the basin is this bowl right here. It's hard to see. I'm going to switch to a picture of the
Thank
actual
you.
basin, but it's right next to Mendenhall. That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we zoom back into it, there we can see the Suicide Glacier with the melt that's filling the basin right there. You can see there's old ice remnant from the Suicide Glacier. The main glacier, which acts as a dam, is out there. So there's your ice dam. And this fills up with water every summer to some extent. And then at a certain point, which we can't totally predict, it's going to drain and release water that is going to flow under the Mendenhall Glacier and out into Mendenhall Lake. And the process of that water flowing under the glacier, because it creates friction, as it flows, it widens the drainage channel. So you can imagine if you're in the bathtub and you pulled the plug, and as the bathtub drained, the drain hole got bigger and bigger. That's what happens with the glacier outburst flood. So we fill it up with water. We start it trickling under there. We can see that, and I'll show you the science of that in a sec. And then as it goes, it just like that channel opens up. And so we get this massive, potentially massive flood event resulting from that. Okay, just to give you a sense of the size, the basin, you could line 4 cruise ships up across it. So it's about 3/4 of a mile in length and about 1/3 of a mile in width. So we're talking about a huge area that can hold liquid water behind this ice dam, and again, release it as a glacier outburst flood.
Mayor has a question. Madam Mayor.
Thank you. When it releases, approximately how much of the water in the lake releases?
That is a great question. And if we could answer that question, we'd be a lot better off. Usually it's changed over time. And that was really, you've kind of hit, Aaron will come to this in a minute, but you've hit on what happened this year was that it drained further than it has in the past. It's kind of the take home message. So we have a number of tools that we use to track this. The important thing for us is we need to watch the water filling in the basin. And then as soon as the water level starts to go down, we know that the basin is starting to drain, and we can issue an alert that the flood's going to happen maybe a day or so later. So we use time-lapse cameras, which many of you may be familiar with. There's an online website where you can track the basin filling with the time-lapse cameras. We use drones to make images, digital maps of the basin. We also have used the laser rangefinder in the past. So these are the tools that help us understand the rate at which the basin is filling and pinpoint exactly when it's starting to drain. And I'll just give you a quick, so this is this summer, the time-lapse camera, and you can watch here as the basin fills up over the course of the summer. And so it's filling over time, sometimes upwards of 1 meter per day, and then it drains out very quickly. And this is the internet's slow, so it's a little jerky there, but you can basically see the filling and draining of the basin. And so this is kind of the main thing that we're watching every day is it's filling up. And then as soon as this is about 1 to 3 pictures a day, and then right there, it starts to collapse down. And so as soon as we see it and the cameras, like it turns around and it's like, okay, it's starting to drain. We have a day or so lead time. And that's when we get in touch with Tom, and Aaron goes into the forecasting. We also can make a map of the basin, and this is a super useful tool. So this, we flew up and we use a drone and we made this digital map. And so we can now calculate the exact volume after the basin drains. And we have a much better estimate of that than we did in the past when it didn't drain completely. And so if you were to fill up that sort of blue hole that you see in the map there, you could put about 14 billion gallons of water into it before it would start to overtop the ice dam and flow along the edge of the glacier there.
I have a question. Did
Yeah.
you just get this map, or when did you get this good map? that you
Right
know
after
it's
it
14
drained this
billion?
time. So we try to go up before it drains and after it drains every year. But when we got up this year, we realized, oh my gosh, it's drained more than it ever has in the past. This map's going to be even more useful to help us pinpoint how much water the basin can store.
So this map, which is new, is where you get the 14 billion.
Yeah, which
Okay.
is great. The problem is that because part of the basin is ice, that it's always melting. And so it's good for now, but next summer it's going to be different. And that's
Got it.
one of the many challenges. Couple other challenges are access, damage to instruments. So it's a really challenging place to work up there. So Jamie has to rappel down and put in these sensors, and then they get smashed by icebergs and we lose them and we start over again. So just to make the point that this is a really difficult thing to monitor because of all the ice choking the basin and just the access, the steep rock walls, et cetera. And then here, this is basically just showing, and I won't go into a lot of detail here, but from either the laser rangefinder or the pictures, we can plot the elevation of the water in the basin. And then, as I said, as soon as we can see from the cameras or other data that the elevation of the ice and water in the basin starts dropping, we know that the flood's going to follow right after that. And so that's what we use to issue that warning, is like, hey, it turned around, it's starting to drain. That's when the warning gets issued. Okay, and I'm going to turn this over to Aaron to talk about the weather service piece of it.
Great, thanks, Aaron. So what you're seeing here is the differences that we've seen ever since 2016 of our largest outburst floods that we've seen. So you can see what we saw this past year, 2023, was the highest, if not largest, that we've seen in the past. And the way the Weather Service does forecast these types of events is we use information from previous events. And so in the research that Aaron does, and then the monitoring program that USGS helps out with the camera aspects. And so the big thing here was that this event was the largest that we ever seen. As Aaron was alluding to, we saw the most amount of water come out of the basin at one time. And you can see how much larger some of those volume of water that came out in 2023 was 44,000 compared to 2016, which was 27,000. That was the previous record. And so since 2016, there were 6 large ones, these 4 events, and they're all time shifted. So they're about the same, but you can also see from this past year, it was also the fastest too. And it was the fastest one to rise, and also not just the highest. And so we kind of have an idea of what the volume of water is. So this is just another data point for us. For going forward, now we know the range of possibilities are out there. And now we know from the monitoring program within the basin, we have an idea of how much that water can be held at those full basin elevations. And then the problem or the issue is, how far is it going to go? This year, once we were past the record stage, it could have shut off at any time. That was a really hard portion that we had to convey to the public, where it could stop at any time, but it could also go much higher because we just didn't know how much water was going to be coming out at one time, because we never saw this type of event at one time. The model that we do use is similar to what Aaron was talking about, where it's a simple dam break model, which is just erodes that hole larger and larger and ramps up the hydrograph, similar to what you see on the graphs here. And Suicide Basin did release 2 weeks prior, and we were able to have a good idea of how much volume of water was left in there after a rise. And we were able to model that fairly well. Next year, we could probably do the same thing, but the problem is that we don't know how low is going to go each season or each event. And there's other aspects of that we still need to learn about and know more about what's going on within the basin.
That's all we have. So we're
So-
happy to take questions.
Okay, I'm sure we have a bunch. Who wants to start? Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Thank you for being here and for doing this work. I'm just trying to understand this chart a little bit. So, sorry, explain to me some. I'm just trying to understand this chart. Like,
Can you just explain the chart? Because
thank
it's needs some.
Yeah. Okay. So
I could have said it a third time, but you got to do it better.
you're seeing the outburst floods from the last 6 years that were the largest ones. And on the left, on the y-axis, you have the discharge, how much volume of water is going through the gauge. And then you have the time on the bottom. And so we time lagged all the different years to the same kind of start time. And then you can start seeing the differences in how it rises in time and how high it got and how much volume came out. So
This data, not to interrupt, but this data is from the Mendenhall. So we have the USGS maintains the Mendenhall River gauge. It has been there for years, many years. It's what we monitor. We have the Taku, we have gauges throughout Alaska, but We have the Mendenhall gauge and that data is derived here. So that allows us to actually compute the area under the curve for the water that came out of the basin, as well as the monitoring up in the basin. So this data you can find on the web for, if you just look up USGS NWIS for Mendenhall, that's what this plot that Aaron is describing. It's all the water under the curves over all these various years.
So the axis is actual measurements of water flowing past the gauge that lives somewhere on the river.
Lake control is the lake. And so, and we get that data because maybe you've seen us out on the back loop. I know Beth sees us down on the Taku. We come down and we're the funny ones on the bridge with this funny contraption measuring that water. And so that allows us to build what's called a rating curve to actually develop this discharge graph here, which is on the y-axis, and then you have time on the bottom there. So that's what our role is here. So
Okay, good, Mr.
And
Smith.
so that rating curve that Jamie just mentioned is that correlation between the amount of water that comes out in the stage that you hear that says 15 feet, 14 feet, 10 feet. So there's a relationship that how much water is coming out at those stages. And so what you're seeing here is just the amount of flow, amount of water is coming out.
Mr. Smith.
And yeah, and just so I now understand the table, I see the peak date, but the first, I guess the second and third column from the left. I mean, so that's volume in a couple of different.
Yeah, that's just acre feet, which is
Very
like a USGS.
And then the next couple of columns are that. So that's the total
Yeah.
volume, and then the others are the flow rate.
Exactly.
Okay.
So there's the volume and the flow rate. And one thing that's confusing about these and like lends itself to complacency is that, you know, you see we picked the 6 biggest years. There's a lot of years where we had an outburst flood that wasn't even noticeable, right? No one even noticed. It's like, oh, we had an outburst flood. No one noticed, right? And so statistically, they're extremely variable in time. And when there was a story in K2O and it said something like the worst is yet to come. And where that came from was my comment was, this surprised me this year because we didn't know the capacity of the basin, which we have quantified much better now. But from a statistical standpoint, these outburst floods occur over decades. And so if you look at the other ones where we have data on the Taku River, the Snow River, on the Kenai Peninsula, and you plot the floods over time, they're all over the place. Sometimes the biggest flood is 30 years in. Sometimes it's 8 years in. Sometimes it's 40 years in. And so I said, I'm not surprised because the fact that we would have had the biggest flood in the first 10 or 12 years statistically is unlikely, but we also didn't see this exact flood coming because we couldn't measure the basin. It had never drained that fully. And that's what really changed this year.
Not just fully, but also at one time.
Yeah.
Like we've seen it get that low, but not at one time. We haven't seen it from a full basin to almost a completely empty basin. The basin would still have water in it too. When we were able to get those drone survey, there was still water in the basin. So we
Yeah.
still didn't see a full dry basin.
And this year also, we had a repeat. We had an outburst right after the big one.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone, again, it's like, it looks like a rain curve, it looks like a heavy 4-inch Juneau classic heavy rainstorm. That curve has similar shape to it. We had another one. And that kind of told us that the drainage channel might actually be lower in the basin. So we have learned an enormous amount out of this event. These big events offer a really unique chance for us to really analyze, really get into the details of what we're looking at.
Okay, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Do you have a theory of why this was the biggest one, or is that you'll know in 10 years from now when you do all the studying?
Well, there's really 2 reasons. One is that the basin is actually expanding because remember, one wall of it is ice. And we can see now that it's eroding out into the main glacier and widening the basin, which increases the volume. The other issue is the complete drainage, which we hadn't seen in the past. Why it drained more completely now, we don't know. And the real problem is that we'd love to study the drainage hole, but it's under tons of icebergs. One theory is that perhaps in the past, when there was even more ice, when it started draining, some of those icebergs would just clog the drainage hole, shut it down, and then it would kind of just leak out over time. And because now there's less ice in the basin, it's had a more complete drainage. The other issue, there's 2 things going on in the long term. One is the glacier itself is the dam. The Mendenhall Glacier is getting thinner. Any of you who go out to the Mendenhall Glacier can look at it over time, and it's getting lower. That's good because you can hold less water back in the basin. The other thing that's happening is that the icebergs in the basin are also melting. If you imagine holding a cup of water full of ice and water, and you poke a hole in the bottom, not too much water comes out if you have a lot of ice in there. If you can, the more of that ice that melts in the basin, the more volume of liquid water there is. Right now, that process of expanding and melting ice is outcompeting the process of the dam going down. That's why we had a bigger flood this year. But the exact drainage mechanism is impossible to study because we can't see it.
Ms. Candies.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Forgive me if I was like, I'm with you. And now I'm like, no, I'm not with you. So the melting is not increasing what it can hold, or it's a good thing
Well,
that it's melting
no,
because
it's-
it seems like it would make it hold more water.
If the glacier is well, you can debate whether the glacier melting is a good thing or not. My battery is of course about to run out. The glacier melting lowers the dam. The icebergs that are filling the basin, when those melt, it makes more room for liquid water. And so there's two competing processes there. So it depends which ice you're talking about, whether it's a good thing for the flood or a bad thing for the flood.
Okay, that's helpful.
I have two questions. One, why is it dammed at all? Right?
So
Because so there's a glacier
yeah,
and then it's dammed, and then when does it undam? It's still there.
It undams around 2050 when the glacier recedes back up past that. That's why I said it's
No,
like a
I mean-
decadal.
I mean, the basin. The basin is now empty. And,
Oh.
and why does it fill up?
Because the
there's
ice-
some kind of
Because the
hole
pressure
that
of
it
the
goes
ice
out
will
through.
close the hole.
Pardon me?
The pressure of the ice will close the hole. So next year it'll be sealed.
Pressure of who? The Mendenhall Glacier ice?
Yeah. The hole will
Okay.
reseal over
Literally
time.
opens, and then because of the overburden, the stress of the ice, it literally reseals. it.
Okay, cool. So the next question is, what you say it's hard to predict, you don't, and your instruments keep getting smashed by icebergs and other things. Is there any instrumentation that you need that you don't have? Is there resources that can help measure, predict anything? Or is it just, you guys end up repelling?
There's a lot of things. I mean, we need more drone surveys up there. We need, the USGS is going to we're hopefully going to get a couple cameras in there, a lake level sensor. And really, we need just someone who has the skills to work on modeling the evolution of the basin. The good thing is that we have made these digital maps for years now. And so we can put them all together in a row and say, look how it's evolving over time. And then someone who understands glacier dynamics can model like how we can predict that it will evolve in the future. And that will help us to understand kind of that competition between the dam getting lower and the basin expanding and losing ice, and whether we can expect the volume to increase in the future. But that said, it's super challenging because we have a basin that can hold a tremendous amount of water right now. We could have almost no outburst flood next year. Like, it's entirely possible. Or we could have an outburst flood that's bigger than this year. There's just, again, if you look at the statistics, they're just all over the place. And there's these unknowable aspects to them.
On the forecast side, now we have another data point. So this increases our ability to be able to forecast the range of possibilities. And when we're in the events, we can see how is it changing over time? Where is this different from other years? So we can adjust our forecast in the event to say, well, this is coming out very similar to 2023 and on how fast it's coming, or looks like it's a little bit slower as like from this other 2018 event. So the Weather Service will use analog years to kind of, when we're in the event, to see where that outflow, how that rate of rise is happening, and try to pair it up with the previous year or a similar year, and then kind of be able to forecast that from what we know of how much volume of water can be held in the basin. And that's something that we really didn't know. Now we know not exactly, but a really good number of how much water can come out at one time. And so that improves our ability to at least give a range of possibilities.
Okay, just to summarize that, Dr. Hood, you said you named some things you're going to get. So is there anything you need that you don't have?
we're currently, we're gonna bring the monitoring program. We've done some back and forth on monitoring. It's just by robust, it's a challenging place to put instrumentation. What the USGS does, it is kind of what we do. We string cables up. We need to get a range of stage. You know, we do it throughout Alaska, whether that be rivers and ice jams and stuff like that. So we have this technology that it's a challenge up there because you have ice. Once it goes, it floats, it migrates and it comes over. Typically for us, we have, if you look at the ascending, if you look at this curve, you see an ascending limb and then a peak. We have very robust data going up. Sometimes our curves don't come all the way down. That's not so important for us. What's important for us is the rise and the top of the curve so that we see that. So we build it, and that's why I brought the laser into it, because it's non-contact, but we do some other modeling, some other things that we need to have actual finer resolution than that. So we'll actually string hardware all the way down into the low level so that we can get that range of stage up. But that, by virtue just of its location, is kind of tricky to do. We've got some workarounds and some things like that, but it's ongoing and we're working on that. We've also lost a lot of sensors in that area. So we've taken some hits, but we've learned a lot, you know, frankly.
Okay.
So
Great, thank you. I have Ms. Hale, Wahagidok, and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I really appreciate it, and thanks so much for being here. It's sobering. So as I'm trying to imagine, and I'm glad you said that the ice of the Mendenhall plugs a hole every single year. And as I'm trying to imagine, and I've lived around glaciers my whole life, but I don't know them that well. To my mind, it seems like it's almost like a new glacier there in front of Suicide Basin because it's moving, or am I not really thinking about that? I mean, like every year, right? It's not the same.
Yep,
It's
that's
not-
correct. They're all three of them nodding their head.
They're all nodding. Okay, super. I
Yeah.
really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Amount of calving we've seen come ice.
have to go see the time lapse.
Right.
Remind yourself how fast.
I can't hear.
Yeah, it's moving very quickly along so that's also the position of where the drainage hole is
Thank you.
moves down glacier over time as well. So the way you're thinking about that is exactly right.
Ms.
Oh,
Hale, keep
yes.
going if you have more.
I have one more question, if you don't mind, Madam Deputy
Go
Mayor.
ahead.
Thank you. So I'm sure you've heard this too, but at a certain point, right after the Yokalip happened, I kind of had the idea that of the 32,000 residents of Juneau, approximately 30,000 of them had theories about what we should do, because I've heard lots of theories. And then I look at the pictures and I look at that waterfall going into Suicide Basin, and that's a really, really, really big waterfall going into Suicide. It seems like there's a lot of water going in there. And people have said, well, we should work with the Army Corps of Engineers and figure out a way to drain it. And I just wonder what you guys think of that.
Mr. Hale, Ms. Hale, we're going to save that for Mr. Watt. He's going to talk about that after these guys are done, if that's okay with you.
Good luck, Rory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There have been some minor efforts in Switzerland to channelize and contain and get overflow and just relieve the overburden of water. There have been some successful in Chamonix. A colleague of ours just recently had a small, very, very small one. They just dug a channel. I can't really speak to that, but it would be really, really difficult. Just knowing the topography, having made so many trips in and out of there and knowing the terrain, I think it would be really difficult. I'm not saying it's out of the realm. I think there's other monitoring efforts that we might be able to do that might, be more robust for long-term monitoring. Yeah.
Right. And that's why I asked about the instrumentation, or do you need something that you don't have, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really what we need is like a full-time person to work on this, because we've had that in the past, and all the research that's been done up there, to be clear, was grant funded. Like the university wrote grants and federal agencies gave us money to study this, in particular, the Alaska Climate Science Adaptation Center, which is part of the USGS. It's like a scientific arm of the USGS. We have no more funding now. Like our funding is ended. And so I'm talking to anyone I can to say, we need to get someone. We had someone for 2 years who worked on this full time, started the whole drone monitoring, mapping, all of that program. We need to like jumpstart all that stuff as soon as we can. So I'm trying to get federal money to do that as quickly as I can.
Thank you. I think Ms. Hale's done. Wahagidak.
Yeah, it's kind of related to the Switzerland mention. I was just wondering if there's been comparable situations and circumstances, maybe in other countries, like you mentioned, or other
Yeah.
places that we've learned.
Yeah,
from or
worldwide.
seeing.
Yeah, it's a phenomena that's
Worksession.
happening more and more. The frequency is increasing. Glacier Lake outburst floods are happening. Nepal, Tibet, Pakistan, they're, high mountain areas. It's, as glaciers thin and receive, these events. I mean, even around here, and even the a lot of the gauges, Salmon Hyder, Taku, just to name a couple local ones in Southeast. So yeah, they do
But
happen.
In terms of like actually mitigating them, anything of this scale, I've never seen
No.
anything where you can mitigate.
I think like early
something.
warning was really.
Yeah, I mean, that's
critical.
Pretty
Yeah.
robust what we have set up here.
Yeah.
Be able to monitor what we can with the camera system that we have from the USGS, the drone surveys has been done from the UAS, the Weather Service uses all that information to be able to have an understanding, give you guys as much heads up of this stuff happening. And with this, we take the difference between the pictures, we can really see the vectors going up and going down. If you guys see, go to that webpage that we have set up for the suicide basin monitoring from the Weather Service. We utilize all the information that we have, and I don't know of any other type of monitoring program that has this type of robust information that we get day in and day out. Like we're monitoring it 24/7 right now. We're watching it rise.
Mr. Smith, do you have a question about this particular section? We'll get Mr. Watt in and then you'll get to comment on what Mr. Watt has to say. Mr. Smith. Oh,
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. A little reluctant to ask, but I kind of think we should. I know it's hard to, or sounds very impossible to predict, the size and the wind and all that kind of stuff. But like, do we know how much water that basin can hold? Do we know like what the biggest outflow would be? And do we know
Right
what that
now-
would look like on the river?
Yeah, right now we do. I mean, it was pretty much what we just saw because it was drained almost to the bottom and we know the exact volume. We have a map of it. But the problem is that next year there's more ice melting between now and then. And so when we go back in May, we could make another map, but it's all full of snow. It's partially full of water. It fills up all summer. And so the only time we can really get a very precise measurement of the amount of water that holds is right after it drains. But in a way, that's obviously unhelpful because we wanted it before and not after. And that's the real challenge. And I'll echo what other people said. This is probably one of the best studied, best monitored glacier outburst floods anywhere on Earth that we have this early warning system, but there's still a tremendous amount that is unknowable about the dynamics of it.
okay. Go ahead, Mr.
Just
Smith.
to follow up, and I don't know if you're the right groups, but if we got something that was the exact, if it was the same, whatever volume flow,
Yeah.
I mean, what does that look like on the river? Obviously, it's why, anyway, what does that look like for the river?
It depends on where the river starts and where when the basin starts releasing. So that's also something to be said, like when the river starts at a certain level, like, so the river started at 5.5 feet this event. It rose up to just under 15 feet. And so, it was what it was, but what if it was the previous weekend when we had rainfall that raised the river just on the rainfall alone, 3 feet. And then you had a glacier dam outburst flood on top of that. So now we're looking at a 18-foot crest. So it's hard to say that because it really depends also of where the river is at, where the lake and river is starting before an outburst flood takes place. And then run into complications like how low is the basin going to go each time. So again, we can have a range of possibilities from when the release elevation. And then during the event, we can have better information of how the event's unfolding. But it's really difficult to say from the onset of how low is it going to go? How much water is going to come out?
Can we
Okay,
model
madam.
18 feet? Can we, okay,
So,
and see
so
what
we,
that looks like?
a project with the Weather Service and CBJ, we developed these inundation maps. And these inundation maps for the Mendenhall Valley, based on outburst floods, because these were things that we didn't know. This was like in 2011. So we developed these inundation maps, and that goes up to 16 feet, 15 feet on the published maps. And we had one that was unpublished, thinking that we'll keep it private because it was just, we didn't think it was going to attain that size. The reason we had the very high ones was on top of an atmospheric river and then a glacier dam outburst flood. And so those are the highest possibilities that we could have, but we had information that can provide to the city and to everyone else of like what areas are going to get impacted. So one thing I think you're asking about what we would need is probably redo those inundation maps for higher levels. And that's something that we could, we all can work together for, and to get better inundation maps, use the information that we had from this event, improve those maps at those levels, and then see what it looks like at even higher levels. So like that, say that 18 feet or that 19 feet. And then so that we can be prepared on what could be happening when we're in those types of events.
Okay, we're going to take one more question in this section right now, Madam Mayor, and then we're going to go to Mr. Watt, and then we're going to still have more questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned the Taku, and I know that they have had a history of a flood in January. But I don't recall the Mendenhall River ever having a winter event.
Not outside of an atmospheric river,
No,
not from a
yeah.
glacier outburst flood. That's
Yeah.
what I've seen.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, now we're going to talk to Mr. Watt's going to talk about, can we do anything about all of these things? I'm sure there are lots of questions about that. And also, gentlemen, after he's done talking, comment away. Mr. Watt.
Thank you.
Stop sharing. Okay, I can.
Are we good? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So to try and put this in relatable terms, this is a massive amount of water. So Dr. Hood said 14 billion gallons. So to try and kind of calibrate that, anybody that goes hiking up the Salmon Creek Road and you go up, and just as you crest the hill and you're out of breath, and there's a big steel green tank that's part of our municipal drinking water system, it's about 6,000 times the volume of that tank. If that tank let loose, that road would wash out. We can't really overstate the quantity of water. And anybody who went out during the flood or watched the videos just saw the awesome and terrible power of nature. Of course, we want to figure out, can we do things? Are things possible? You've just heard from people who are studying something that is, we know more about this situation, we think, than anybody in the world has a like situation. And Dr. Hood said in 2050, the Mendenhall will recede, and maybe the Suicide Basin channel won't be like this. But you've got the entire Juneau ice field behind it, and maybe there are new opportunities for chaos out there as well. We just don't know. So in the Mendenhall Valley, when Juneau was developed primarily in the 80s, we ran extensive storm drainage system across the valley to drain storm water to the Mendenhall River. And during the event, those storm drains backed up and flooded people's homes who were interior from the river. We have, in terms of municipal storm drain pipes, big pipes for us, 36-inch diameter pipes, not huge, but big. So the question people have asked is, can you stop the water? On a dry day, there are measures that you can do, and here are a few things. So slide gates, you can install a big valve and drop a big steel plate down in front of your storm drain pipe. So if you had that in place and you were notified and it was a dry day, you could run out there and turn the valve, but all that water flowing into that pipe would start to back up into the neighborhood. So on a dry day, you might buy yourself a fair amount of time. If it was raining you might not buy yourself that much time at all because the capacity of the storm drain pipes themselves is not great. On a big event, maybe they flow a third full. There are other mechanisms, or there are flaps where you can have like just a even more simple steel flap that flows down and then gets pushed open by storm flows. Those would not seal watertight. So in an event like this, you're probably going to get water backed up in the system. There are things like on the right, duckbill valves. These are big neoprene valves that open up when the water's flowing out, and when the tide raises, they slam shut. And so it's a passive system. So there are mechanisms. And there
Mr. Watt, can I ask you, are you talking about when you said, can you stop the water? You're talking about stopping the water from going into the drain or coming back out from the drain? I'm not.
Coming back up into the neighborhood.
So
So as
coming
the
back
river-
out. So-
As the river
Okay.
rises, a passive system like this would slam that valve shut because the head pressure of the river would be higher and the water would back up into the neighborhood if it was raining. So there are things like this that could be looked at. May make sense, may not make sense. They are municipal scale affordability, tens of $1,000s, maybe 100,000 or 200,000, something like that. And we should look at that and contemplate that. We don't have that many storm drain pipes into the Mendenhall River. And now that we have this data point, we obviously have exposure in the river. And the question I think we have to ask ourselves is for the interior homeowners who are low relative to where the river crested, is there something that we could or should do? So that all on its own is a complicated question. And I think be a lot of interest in that.
Question, let me ask questions on this part. I'll get this is the flooding from the storm drain.
Flooding from the storm drain backing up into the neighborhoods. Okay. Well, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, and try not to laugh because people legitimately have asked this question. People have asked the question, right? Could you bomb the glacier? You could. I don't know if you could ever get permitted to do it. I don't know that you could ever predict what would happen. I don't know that you would even know where to get a bomb or how to detonate it. But people lost incredible value and sense of peace. And they want us to ask these questions. Could you blow up the glacier? I mean, I guess you could, right? On the left, we had somebody who said, how about a siphon? Right. So this is go back to your like high school science where you've got, two things of water in a tube and you basically suck the water up and over. You could in theory, but again, think about those 6,000 Salmon Creek drinking water tanks and you're trying to lower your tube down as your lake lowers. Extremely dangerous, extremely complicated, possibly doable, possibly, I'm not sure. We've had people ask, can you run a tunnel up to the bottom of the lake? Well, you can, right? So we have mining companies in town who do just that. They drill tunnels with incredible precision. We got the power company in the audience. We've got several lake taps that we're lucky enough to have with our hydropower system, and Mr. Mesdag can tell us the value of those lake taps, but you can drill a tunnel up into the bottom of a lake. The problem that you run into is, in this case, we've got the map that we have, and somebody would have to say, I think we run it here. And then we just talked about the numbers of icebergs and the fact that the glacier forms this dam on the side of the lake. And I'm pretty sure that tunnel would be frozen too. And I don't know there'd be any way to know how to do that. And we're talking millions and millions of dollars. And then the last one is actually a picture of a couple excavators. And I don't know if this is from Switzerland, Tom. This is France. France. So some entertaining people in France had a situation very, very modest in size, and they actually ran excavators up under their glacier and they ditched it out. That is not the scale of our issue. That is, our issue dwarfs that. If you think back to Dr. Hood's slide with the 4,000-foot cruise ships and the mouth that's about 1,000 foot wide, massive, massive things. And so I don't think on a practical level, we can do anything about this other than try to map it, try to understand it, try to communicate. And if you think about how hard it is for the federal government to allow action, we're talking about the Forest Service, who's been doing an EIS at the visitor center to talk about expanding parking lots and trails, modest human changes to the environment. And it's taken them some 7 years to decide, you know, it would be okay for the natural environment to expand a parking lot by 20% or 50%. So the scale of the problem is massive compared to the likelihood that you could actually do something like this. So I hope this is helpful to put this in context of just how big the geography and the volume of water is.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Do you have anything to say about any of those
Yeah, I
comments?
mean, just one comment. We were kind of talking amongst ourselves, like the siphon one sort of sounds the most promising in a way. But if you look at that waterfall, you'd have to siphon more water than is coming in that waterfall, which is just not possible because otherwise it's going to fill up anyway, right? You could siphon a little water out, but you got a whole big glacier melting water into it. There's no way you're going to build a siphon system that's going to outpace that. Anyway, and bombs definitely won't work and would be really hard to get permitted. So, yeah, no, I mean, there's no real obvious mitigation strategy, and there's nowhere I've ever seen where they've dealt with something on this scale and were able to mitigate it beyond when you talk about like downstream, like stopping water from coming into neighborhoods, armoring banks, like, which is a totally different discussion. But really, you know, the one thing that we can bank on is at least we have a really good new data point, and we'll be able to do a much better job, at least in the near future, of getting the worst case scenario better than we did this time. And just hoping that, hey, it stopped draining halfway, we can all go home. Like it wasn't a big deal, but we can have a better idea of like what that worst case scenario is.
Okay. Here.
So all of the fun part is talking about the siphons and the bombs. I'm going to go back to your slide gates and flaps. With this big event as we had, I mean, if you're staying on the river, you could just see the violence of the river. Wouldn't it just take those gates and flaps away?
Thank you, Mayor. So the gates, you know, you might put that gate 10 or 20 feet back from the bank, you know, at the edge of the cul-de-sac or somewhere. So that gate you could put in a location not right at the riverbank. We have two in town that are very visible. So if you're driving on Egan Drive and you look at Twin Lakes, there are two valves that are open and lowered usually annually to drain the lake and allow the salt water to come in to kill the milfoil that starts to clog up the habitat. So the gates are kind of a normal thing in the agricultural world in New Orleans, where you've got levees. That's a relatively normal thing. The others are a little more rudimentary. The duckbills, we have a duckbill on the Mendenhall River that survived the storm. It's fairly normal technology. A duckbill, while passive and doesn't take any maintenance effort, you don't have to go out and exercise it and make sure it's not jamming up. It will reduce the capacity of water that you can get out of your storm drain, but pros and cons on all that. Good things for engineers to think about.
Mr. Bryson and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Well, I appreciate all of this conversation. It's been very informative, educational. As we're talking about solutions, I came across a term, fluvial geomorphology, the study of how rivers make their formations. So imagine that you guys aren't fluvial geomorphologists. You're just glaciologist. Okay, so how do we bring the right river experts that can give us real answers and say, well, you need to have some boulders in the river at certain parts, and you have to have some elbows in the rivers? I mean, as I learned from Mr. Matisse, if you just armor your whole banks and they have them just straight, we're not only going to get faster water, and then if we lose the elbows, then it's just going to increase in velocity if you have a nice straight armored path. So we have more issues than just tracking how big it is. And I also want to point out a couple things. There is a part of the river by Riverside Drive. It's where the river gets the closest to the road. We call it Junk Car Bend. And there's approximately a dozen cars from the 50s that were placed there due to a glacier dam outburst. I want to say late 50s, early 60s, something like that. And, you know, so Juneau has been doing things to the river for at least 70 years to deal with these glacial outbursts. So can we get one of those guys or one of those scientists to come in and say, here's what your river, here's how your river is going to perform the best for the situation that you have, as we're trying to come up with real solutions? Because out of all the things that I've heard, you know, the river action is going to be the one thing that could maybe be realistic. Thank you.
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So harnessing the river, right? Is it possible, and what would it cost? We see home and property owners making very modest riprap bank armoring efforts today on discontinuous sections of the river. If you were to try and do that for the entire river and get permitted, just real ballpark, 100 million, something like that, and maybe not permittable. It is a big issue. And then you would have the question of who would own those improvements. Several years ago, when we had a group of property owners who were interested in leveraging federal funds, there was a proposal on the table whereby the CBJ would be a conduit for those federal funds to make those improvements. But the upshot of that is CBJ would own and maintain those improvements, not homeowners. So the only entity who could step in with that level of funding, not to say that they would be the federal government. And then that would become a piece of municipal infrastructure, which I think we would rapidly reach the conclusion is well beyond our means. In designing improvements like that, you know, step one is you sit down and you say, okay, we're going to figure out the design flood. And we look at our guys and we say, what's the design flood? And they say, we're getting better, right? We just overshot our previous high flood by 80%, right? So in trying to think about something like that, it is a massive undertaking to understand the engineering necessary, and nothing lasts forever, right? So you might build bank armoring or bank stabilization things, and they might have a 10-year design life or a 20-year design life. And if you're willing to write the bigger check, you get that 30-year design life or that 50-year design life, or what you think is that. But if you're not willing to write the big check, you get a shorter design life.
You, Mr. Watt, for reminding those of people who weren't around for that particular event. The city had meetings over a year about that issue. The neighborhood worked. I mean, there were many complications to that whole thing, and the homeowners in the end also would also have to agree, and it's hard to get 100% people to agree, et cetera. You have a follow up, Mr. President?
Yes. Okay. So that was incredibly helpful. So while, yes, we don't want to bring a geomorphologist to come and say, this is how you want to design your river. But if we had a river scientist expert that said, this is how your river's behaving, this is what the massive flows of water are doing. If we had the same level of understanding of how the Mendenhall River is going to behave with the armoring that we've done, with the elbows that we have left, it erased some elbows, this event. And in 2018, it erased the oxbow. So we've lost length off our river. It's a straighter river now. So maybe I'm asking if we could just get the same level of understanding for the Mendenhall River that we do have for the Suicide Ice Basin. We'll have a complete picture of what the basin's going to do and how the river may or may not react. I don't know if a geomorphologist.
I could
Bill,
make one
provide-
comment on that.
Oh.
So in the recent, can I speak about the LiDAR? So the LiDAR data was we just flew some really high detailed, Pat Dreyer with the DOT flew LiDAR of the entire river. And that.
Could you
we
speak
do is-
more into the microphone? People are having a hard time hearing you. Thank you.
So we just
Mr.
flew
Pierce.
LiDAR data of the entire river channel as well as the lake as well. And that is going to give us centimeter accuracy on not only the river. So we really want to know what that geometry is before and after that after event geometry of our channel for us at the USGS. It's from the upper bridge up. Okay. And when we really understand that, then what we can do and the accuracy we get out of that is enormous. And that information tells us a lot about not only the geometry, but the banks. Okay. And then we can model up from that downstream. There is a lot of talks about continuing that same modeling going on so that we can really get to understand what is happening in the entire reach of the river. So, yeah. So there is some ongoing work like yeah. And I just tell you that this LiDAR, it's a bit of a game changer. It's those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's laser. It's basically drone data, drone flown that's shooting lasers down and getting centimeter accuracy detailed over the entire area that it flies, often in a grid. And so we're looking at a pretty fast turnaround on getting that information out right away. We want to know like pronto, like really quickly what really happened. So that's kind of in the works, but.
So, Madam, you had something, Mr. Smith, and then Ms. Hale, and then Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. And maybe it's already done or being done or whatever, but I mean, so we can't really mitigate mitigate the flow or the outflow. I mean, armoring the bank sounds like a big long-term project. I mean, in the short term, is there a system or can there be a system in place? So by next year, as we're watching the basin fill and coupling it with current rivers levels, we can say, I mean, these people potentially, I mean, evacuation and that and whatever, that type of stuff. I mean, does that already exist?
Who wants that one?
So
I mean, it's really.
Mr. Jacobs.
So it's a really good question. And I think the lowest hanging fruit is the combination of what Jamie was just talking about, this LiDAR and updating those inundation maps. So then when we're in the event, we can know at those higher levels, what areas are getting inundated. And then it gives Tom and the emergency management folks a lot more information of getting that information to the public and say, hey, you might want to leave for tonight. We're not going to save anyone's property, but we can keep people safe. That's our ultimate thing that we want to do at this time right now. So the inundation maps will at least know where your hazards are and how, like the oxbow was mentioned. Yeah, that's gone. So that's maybe why the maps didn't perform as well in some of the areas closer to the field house. But I went out and canvassed the whole region, and those maps at 15 feet verified fairly nicely. Like it showed the areas that I got inundated and also to the depths of where it got. So there is some good confidence that if we update those with the latest information of the LiDAR, that could help us going into next year. So at least we know what areas could get inundated or get affected when we see an outburst flood take place at this other data point that we do have now. Then we have a range of solutions, and the weather service are going to work on trying to give not just a single forecast and try to give a range. And that's something that we've been working for a long time, and also on a probabilistic side. So we're hoping that we can improve it that way.
Thank you. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. This is a really good conversation. I wanted to comment briefly on the bank armoring, and I know we're going to have follow-up meetings. I live a block from the river, and I know from maybe perhaps an engineer's point of view and from the entire river's point of view, the bank armoring is modest. But from my point of view, there is an astonishing amount of work that has gone in on both sides of the river, and some incredible work by the contractors and by the homeowners in actually armoring those banks. I'm hoping that we could actually have some kind of, I don't know if there's a possibility of going upriver, somehow letting the assembly know what banks have been armored and getting some sort of visual on that. I think that would be really important to know. And I think it would be important for, those dump trucks are going by constantly, and they've been going by constantly since this happened. So there's just an amazing amount of work that has happened, and it'd be great if the assembly could be updated at some point in the future. The second point that I'd like to make or question, I think those inundation maps, again, are going to be incredibly important. As I said, I live a block from the river, and let me tell you, I am looking around my house right now and trying to figure out how fast I could move stuff 3 feet up off the floor. I think it's going to be really important for the peace of mind of many homeowners in the Mendenhall Valley, that we have some better idea of whether, are we going to be at risk, and how much lead time will we need, or do I just need to start moving stuff up off the floor now in preparation for next summer?
Any questions for the panel or Mr. Watt, who also is on the panel?
I'm good, thanks.
All right. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Good luck with more information. If there's anything the city can do to help, please let us know. And thank you. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
My point is okay.
Okay, you ready? You ready? Ms. McEwen, are you ready? We're going to call the committee of the whole meeting back to order. The next item on the agenda is Telephone Hill planning process. Who's starting? Mr. Watt. We have some guests here.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Deputy Mayor. I think Lands Manager Blydorn is going to kick us off and introduce his team over there.
Okay, great. We have Dan Blydorn here with Nick Driverstein from CBJ and James Breckenhoff from First 40. And if you could, when you speak, identify yourself so that people know, not every time, but for the first time. Mr. Blydorn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm Dan Blydorn, the land manager for the city and borough of Juneau. And largely tonight's presentation is going to be done by the two gentlemen next to me. So I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nick Drivestein, and I'm a project manager with the CBJ Engineering Department. And we're here today to talk and give an update on a project that we've got going on underway with our consultants, First 40 Feet. That's the Telephone Hill redevelopment study. For those who are unaware or need a refresher, the purpose of this project is to study the newly acquired CBJ land up on Telephone Hill and determine possible development options that both optimize land use and fulfill any community needs. So if we take a look at our project timeline here, we've split the project into two basic phases. First phase being project orientation, while the next phase will be master plan and concept engineering. It's where we'll actually develop a development plan. And right now we're in August, so about 2 months into a 6 to 7 month process. We're transitioning now from phase 1 into phase 2. So we'll get into a little bit on the tasks of phase 1. We did our kickoff and site visit back in late June. During that time, we reviewed our scope of work and started to identify some opportunities and challenges at Telephone Hill. First 40 Feet developed an engagement and outreach plan, which we put into use during our July meetings with stakeholders and the public. We continue to gather background data and analyze it. That helps us complete our Section 106 desktop review, building and hazardous materials survey, and historic resources survey. We've also completed a land survey of Telephone Hill and drafted a base map, and that's going to help us in the next phase during preliminary engineering work. So existing conditions was a big part of project orientation and understanding Telephone Hill. Understanding these existing conditions is a critical piece in developing design concepts. They give us information into things such as utilities and their capacity, accessibility, connectivity, and parking, needed improvements. Things such as that we need to consider during the next phase of the project. Another big component of that is not just what's existing up there, but the history behind it, its historic significance and past uses. That's what our project subconsultant, Northern Land Use Research Alaska, is doing in completing a Section 106 desktop analysis. This analysis is a requirement if future development were to use state or federal funding. At this point, it's unknown whether future development will use state or federal funding, but we wanted to go above and beyond and perform to fully characterize the site, but also to get in front of any sort of contingencies that we may run into during development. With that, I'm going to pass it off to James Breckenhoff, and he's going to introduce himself and talk a little bit about our outreach efforts and what we learned from that.
All right, I'll try my best to talk into the microphone. Yeah, so you can hear me. Yeah, my name is James Breckenhoff. I'm an architect and one of the co-founders of the firm First 40 Feet. I'm just going to talk briefly about our firm so you have kind of a better understanding of what we do and how we approach the work. We're based out of Portland, Oregon. We're a practice that's really focused on creating the framework for the way people want to live their lives. And we do this by bridging the gap between urban planning and the different professional disciplines involved in city making, like civil engineering, landscape architecture, and architecture. We work primarily in the Pacific Northwest, in Washington State, Oregon, here in Alaska, and Idaho. We work on a wide variety of complex projects, mostly for city planning, community development, and transportation departments. The projects include redesigns of main streets, regeneration strategies for downtowns, tactical urbanism projects, transit-oriented developments. So we do quite a wide range of different types of work. How do we approach our work? We do this by trying to reach some form of consensus whenever we're working within a difficult context. And so we typically engage key stakeholders. We also obviously engage the city who have long-term goals, and we engage the residents of the city. It is our job to come in and learn about the needs and wants of the communities we are serving. However, we bring an outside perspective and expertise as well to those communities. So for this project at Telephone Hill, we can go to the next slide. We were here in late July as part of our second visit, and we engaged key stakeholders. We met with Brian Holst from the JEDC, John Sakalaskas from the state of Alaska. We met with Chris Hodgen, state of Alaska as well, Craig Dahl from the Juneau Chamber. We met with property manager of Telephone Hill, Thomas Foss, and Telephone Hill residents, Dr. Emily Kane. And we're still reaching out to the Tlingit and Haida Corporation, the Filipino community, Skip Gray Friends of Telephone Hill, the Juneau Community Foundation, and the Downtown Business Association. So we're trying to get as many people involved as possible to get as many different perspectives as possible. We also met with the residents on our last evening, and this is a photograph from that open house session. So there were over 60 participants there. From what I understand, that was a pretty good showing for Juneau, especially during the summer when it's nice weather and people want to be outside. We introduced the city's goals and objectives for the site, and we set out the timeline for the project and when people could expect to be engaged again with in the next phase alternative design concepts. So we used two different exercises to gather information. So during this session, we're mostly listening and gathering as much input from the community as possible. We used something called Mentimeter, where we asked residents various questions throughout the presentation to sort of gather input. We also did a mapping exercise where we engaged residents and we asked them to identify opportunities on Telephone Hill and areas that presented challenges that could possibly have solutions moving forward. And these results helped us identify specific locations on the site to focus our attention on and provide us with some of the clues about the vision for the site as well. So if you'd like to see those results, we have those as well. There's a lot of detail that went into that. We can go to the next slide. These are from the survey and from the mapping exercise. This is sort of our best synthesis of the most important pieces of information we gathered from the residents. Primarily, it's the people we met with wanted something to happen at Telephone Hill that created a distinct identity, mostly focused on making this into a residential neighborhood, specifically with some multifamily housing. And there was also an emphasis on green spaces, some of the existing trees and landscape features, as well as some of the existing gathering spaces. So that helped give us some insights about some other features that could inform the future design. We looked a lot at access. People are concerned about access through the site and around the site. Here you also see folks want to see a community-focused approach to the redevelopment. And they'd like to strike a balance between the long-term vision and preserving some of the historical charm on the site. So we can go to the next one. And then what we do is we try and distill that information down into something even more succinct. And this is what we've arrived at. The aspiration for Telephone Hill is to, and actually, can you move that? I want to make sure I get the wording exactly right. Yeah. Is to forge an exceptional, vibrant new neighborhood dedicated to housing the people of Juneau, where the fusion of social, ecological, and historical treasures will amplify its character and provide a tapestry of experiences for public enjoyment. And with that, I will pass it back. And
thank you, James. So we'll revisit our timeline here to think about next steps. To finish up phase one of the project, we're going to complete the building and historic survey and final scope. So we're beginning that transition from phase one to phase two, where we'll take the information gathered during site analysis and public outreach of phase one and start to find similarities and a concept from them, to which we'll develop several possible design concepts and development plans, which we can then bring back to the public and receive more input on that. And we'll continue that process until we kind of refine that plan down into something which we can bring again back to the public and back to the assembly for final consideration. Yeah, for final consideration from the managers. That final plan.
Press your button.
We expect that that final development plan to be ready around late November at this point. So that about wraps up the project overview and where we're at with things. So we can open it up to questions if anybody has some.
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So just for your information, don't miss the other slides in your packet. Our team has done a nice job of compiling the information that we received from the public. We knew it was going to be a hot night. We knew that you had a lot on your plate, so we had to squeeze this presentation down. They've done a nice job with community outreach, and I'm just going to flash one slide to you because I think it's the issue the assembly has when you have needs of a neighborhood, needs of the borough. So when we do goal setting every year in December, and this year in December will be no different, you will say housing is a priority, right? And when we did this meeting, they did a really nice job of outreach, engage the public. And there's a slide here that looks like this. It's a little dot graph of who came and testified. And we had 30 people from downtown come, which is great. This is a downtown project. I'm glad 30 people from downtown came. But we also had 0 from Lemon Creek, right? So what you're going to have to face yourselves with is this a downtown project? Are we interested in the near neighborhood, or are we going to be operating at the high level of the assembly goals? So when the team brings those options back to you, that's the question that you have to ask yourselves.
Thank you, Mr. Watt. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. It's a good update. You're obviously just starting, so we hopefully may be able to see you at the next committee of the whole, which is September 18th, if you have your stuff by then. Any questions for the team now? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I was just curious on the community engagement, the second one. I mean, is there something that allows, I mean, anyone can show up to the meeting, but is there going to be like broader public engagement, maybe in a easier way to get perspectives from people that maybe aren't going to drive downtown or something?
Mr. Blydorn or Mr. Driverstein, excuse my, Mr. Blydorn.
We're always looking for creative ways to reach out to the public and get more people involved. And so I think we'll have the regular blitz of social media when we have public meetings. And then really the people who turn out are the people who are most affected by our project. So maybe people in Lemon Creek don't feel connected to this site enough to show up at a public meeting as well. But yeah, definitely if there's any creative ideas that people want us to share or to move forward with, we're always looking for ways to engage the public.
Mayor.
You have Ms. Hale raising her hand too. I'm looking at page 21 of the following uses the project is concerning, please rank in order of your preferences. So it looks like multifamily housing emerges as the top preference, but I'm actually going to the public gathering spaces. Did you vet that out a little bit? Are people looking for indoor spaces, outdoor spaces, or we didn't go that far yet?
Mr. Blydorn looks like he's reaching for the microphone.
We all probably have a little bit of input for that, but I'll start here. And if we need more elaboration, I'll bring it to these two. And so we didn't get too much into the detail of what that green space looked like, but there's existing green space up there. And I think incorporation of natural elements into anything that gets built would also be part of that outcome as well.
Good. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm just trying to get a sense of what the output of this process will be. Will it be a recommendation to the assembly? This is the sort of project we recommend you make. I mean, how detailed and what level will that output be?
Is Mr. who is reaching, whoever gets the microphone first?
Yeah, so the outcome of this project will be a development plan with alternatives that basically tell us what the optimal use of the land is, and that's from all of the research into existing site conditions, into needs and values of the community, and it'll end up in one document that would be up for recommendation.
You want to add to that, Mr. Watt?
Deputy Mayor, so if you look at the very last slide in their slideshow, they've got community engagement 2, CBJ assembly meeting 2, and on that they're listing preliminary concepts. So I think your engagement at that time is you got it, you got the family of concepts that we want to look at, or we need more. So that, and then, you know, preliminary feedback on that from the assembly and the public will then result in a recommendation of a preferred alternative, which the assembly may or may not endorse and may like something else. So it is kind of like a mini NEPA process, if you will.
So if I understanding you correctly, at the next meeting, say we get 10 concepts and we might say, oh, you missed these 4, or we might say, yeah, just develop these 3 more. That's the idea. Who's speaking? Mr. Breckendorf.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. We typically draw 3 distinct alternatives. Sometimes we draw more if we think there are more. We like them to be different, but they'll all be based on the vision that we've set out. So they'll all incorporate those main elements. The idea being that they're different enough that people feel like we're providing a wide enough variety, and we're going to basically extract the best from each one of those options based on the input we receive at the next open house, if that makes sense.
And when are you going to do an open house? After you present ideas to the assembly or before?
You want to?
It'd be before.
Okay. Ms. Euskandis, you had your hand up?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I wasn't entirely sure I understood, so I could have just been my misunderstanding, but you talked about some of the different stakeholders you met with, including JDC and the chamber. But it sounded like you hadn't yet met with Click and Haida or any Filipino organization. So I would just strongly suggest that, I don't know if that's just a scheduling thing and that's on you've got that coming up next week, but I would want to see that.
Yep. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I feel in an odd position as an assembly member because I represent the entire community and I don't live downtown, though I did for many years. But if I were to come to one of these meetings, I also don't want to, because I'm on the assembly, I wouldn't want to participate as a resident. But I do think, and I think perhaps this meeting number 2 with the assembly is the opportunity. I do think it's important that the assembly, because we represent all the residents of Juneau, talk about the options that we favor. And I'm not quite sure what the opportunity for that is. I understand why people from Lemon Creek or Douglas aren't going to these meetings because they feel disconnected from it because Telephone Hill has sort of been off on its own for so many years. But I think there is an opportunity for people to feel very connected to it. And this process might not be doing that. And that's not a criticism. It's just a reflection of the situation that we're in.
Ms. Hale, we would intend to have the assembly, we're hoping to do it on the next COW, to have the concepts, if they can have a meeting sooner. And that would be the assembly's opportunity to ask questions and say what we think.
Thank you.
Preliminarily. I mean, it's going to be a while, but Okay. Oh, Madam Mayor.
Thanks. And then looking at the parking garage, there was some talk about potential housing on there. Did you look at just adding 2 layers of parking? Was that ever in your discussion, either for that neighborhood or for all downtown?
Mr. Bladorn.
Thank you. Great question. So we didn't get into detail of the future uses of the parking garage site, but obviously it was a topic over the past few years with additional parking or some type of structure on top. I will say that one thing we heard at the open house was people viewed that structure as an opportunity. So I'm not sure what would end up going there or what that process would look like, but I think across the board, people saw that site and saw opportunity. So.
Okay, thank you. More questions? Well, thank you for the preliminary update and thanks for your work, and we'll see you again soon if possible. Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys ready? Good to keep going? The next is hazard mapping update. This is a topic we've been talking about for a long time. It's been so long that I'm going to ask the manager to first address why we are contemplating doing this, because we've gone around into the details of maps and hazards and I think if we understand again the why and agree on that, then picking something will be easier. So, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So CBJ first undertook hazard mapping in the downtown area in the early 1970s. When technology for mapping was nowhere what it is today. And we adopted maps and companion code to limit development in those hazard areas, both avalanche and landslide. We did that because we had historic avalanche and landslide events downtown that had led to loss of life and loss of property. For near on the next 40 years, there have been several efforts to try and update those maps, recognizing the weaknesses in the maps. One of the weaknesses, the code treats avalanche and landslide the same. Another weakness is our Title 49 code doesn't always seem to make sense. We had the opportunity to get grant funding to update our maps. And I think at the staff level, we all felt that more accurate mapping and code better aligned with that mapping made sense for the public. And clearly the devil is in the details. And I think that if everyone feels like we've kind of bounced from, why are we doing this, to what are we doing, to how are we doing, to what are the consequences of any of those decisions, it's really hard to keep all those things together. The Assembly had this topic in front of them last year. We had the consultant team, I think it might have even been a year and a half ago in the spring. Since this would result in an amendment to Title 49 by code that should go to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission requested additional direction. We tried to give that direction. I made recommendation in the fall and winter at 2 committees of the whole. The Planning Commission took it up, made recommendation. The issues come back to the Lands, Housing and Economic Development Committee with recommendation from staff on options of how to proceed. So we're simultaneously trying to find the unifying philosophy that holds the Assembly together, and then what to do about that unifying philosophy. And that unifying philosophy, I think we all have to admit may be elusive. The Lands Committee looked at this topic and said, well, this is really bigger than the Lands Committee. So we're going to reduce 2 options and add an option 6 and have the whole body take it up. So you have it in front of you, but it's just not that easy, because you also have members of the public who have dutifully been following this issue, have testified to you by email. They have testified to the Planning Commission. And they really want to be heard. They really want the opportunity to provide you testimony. And it's the ultimate chicken and egg question of They want to testify at a relevant time when they can kind of see where you're headed, and how and when to do that is hard. So that's the why. We're trying to complete this. I think, in all fairness, Pandora's box that we opened up, and it's not particularly easy.
Okay, Mr. Watt, I just want to summarize the why in a really short sentence. You went into some of the back and forth that we did, but why is the CBJ considering hazard maps at all? It's really what responsibility does the government have to either disseminate or require or notify people about the hazards that it knows about? Is that, I mean, I'm talking the 30,000 foot thing here. You know, does the government have a responsibility to notify or to require, or, you know, all the words that you could, and, you know, put in after that? Notify is one, require certain things. That's what we're struggling with, the back and forth of, we have some information, what do we do with the information? Is that?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So yeah, to summarize it, we have existing maps and code that are outdated and admittedly inadequate. And should the municipality take a position of providing information, doing nothing, restricting development in those areas?
Thank you. Any comments on the why at this point? Okay. Mr. Smith.
Thanks. I read Ms. Lane's memo. I guess, is there any requirement that we do any of this for federal funding or anything like that? Because I mean, like, we're required to adopt flood maps or something, right? Is there any federal requirement that we do anything with this? No, who's one?
So I'll just weigh in. So no, when we do flood maps, we do flood mapping for a specific reason, and that's so our citizens can get flood insurance. In this case, we got a grant to do mapping, and I'm looking at Ms. McLean to make sure, as long as we complete the project, we've satisfied the conditions of the grant, and the project can be stopped or continued to the extent that we desire.
Okay, Mr. Smith.
And so completing the project is just someone makes the maps. We don't.
Yeah, there's no federal requirement like the FEMA flood zone thing. No. Okay, we're good, or at least so far. Okay, Ms. McLean, you want to say something? Or Ms. Hale has her hand up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Something that Mr. Manager Watt mentioned in describing his why, you know, as I tussle with, do we adopt, do we accept, how much do we regulate? You know, I'm reminded of the cold storage of the avalanche that took out houses in an apartment building and ended at the cold storage, and it was a terrible disaster. But there was a road high on Mount Roberts that went to the mine, and you know, there's a very probable cause. So we can point to that, but if we don't have maps that we refer to in our code and hold people somewhat accountable to in terms of development, if we don't have code, is there anything preventing people from doing things that are going to then endanger people down a mountain? And I guess that's not my question, but it does seem like the why gets at what we end up doing with these.
Do you want someone to comment? I don't know what anyone. Is that a question, Ms. Hale?
I guess it's not.
I'm not so sure. Yeah.
Question per se. It was
Okay.
just kind of spurred by Mr. Manager's comments.
Sure. Mr. Bryson has a question. Ms. Madam Mayor does.
I'm trying to get the bottom line answer. What consequence are we trying to accomplish here by the recognition? Are we trying to make it where, and what action would the assembly do that would create the consequence that would allow our citizens to build on their property, that would allow the banks to loan to the citizens on their property, and would allow insurance companies to insure those properties, but yet get enough information to the public so that the city is not liable and that we're not deliberately putting people in harm's way. What action can we take that would accomplish all of those goals?
Though, Ms. McLean had her hand up, or Mr. Watt, whoever wants to start talking.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Mr. Bryson, I may need your help in remembering all of your questions, but they are good ones, so I'm happy to try to move this along. I think first and foremost, one of the reasons that we need to address the maps that are currently adopted is simply because, as the manager said, they're not clear. And they're doing a disservice to some of the property owners up here already. If you've looked at the old maps, I mean, I have over 20 something years now of experience reading maps. I still have to triple check myself each time because of just the way they were created. And it's not a criticism, it was just the times. They're almost as old as I am. So like the weights and everything are just difficult to read on those maps, and they conflate the avalanche and landslide areas. My understanding from talking to some property owners, and we've tried to get the insurance agents and the lending institutions to speak on this. I would imagine that it's a difficult question for them to answer as well without a specific site and event in mind, which may be part of the reason that they hesitate to speak publicly. But my understanding from talking to some of the property owners that are in the avalanche zone, and they don't dispute that, they agree they're in the avalanche zone. What they dispute is that they're not in a landslide zone. But because our adopted maps conflate the two, they can't prove differently. And so the insurance companies, as different events happen, insurance, just like everything else, tightens up. And they have now started viewing these properties as one and the same. So I think first and foremost, we're simply doing a disservice to the property owners that are in the avalanche zones by keeping the adopted maps on the books the way they are. The other comment I would make, and I think this might sort of touch on possibly where Assemblymember Hale was going with a question, is that this is one area of the city that we have mapped. We know we have hazards all around the borough. It's not unique to downtown to have avalanche or landslide or slopes in general that are just steep and tricky. So I lost my train of thought there, Mr. Bryson, but you were asking specifically why, if there was a liability, and I don't believe so, but I'm not the attorney, but we know of other hazard areas. We permit them according to the land use code. If they have a slope over 18%, they're required to get a hillside endorsement, which requires a geotechnical analysis by a state of Alaska engineer, licensed by the state of Alaska. And so we require that anywhere that you're working on hillsides. That would apply, and it does apply today. It would continue to apply, I would imagine, in the future. It's just a blanket 18% slope. If you're changing it, you have to come in. And I feel like I may be missing your third point, Mr. Bryson.
Go ahead.
What action can this assembly do that would clarify the maps, satisfy what the city, so that they can continue to use their property, but allow the city to have accurate depiction of what the earth movement in our community is going to do? How does this assembly navigate through that?
I think this assembly in this community, in these times, specifically right now with all the changes, I think what I have heard throughout these last several years now is that the adopted maps don't work. They need to go. The code maybe doesn't get us where we need to go, the current code. And there may not be sort of an equity to it, since it's only applied to the downtown area, which is not all that different from other areas that we know are hazardous. And so I think first and foremost is dealing with what's adopted and what isn't working and repeal that. And then I think the next step, and you said satisfy the public. I'm not sure that that can be attained with everyone, especially in something this I'm not making light of it. These are people's homes. They're their properties. It's their biggest investment, most likely in their lifetime. I don't take that lightly. I am of the camp, I guess, that we should put out the available knowledge that we have, educate the public the best that we can. And then the private sector has to make those decisions for themselves of where they're going to live and whether or not they can get insurance or mortgages for those properties, because that's entirely outside of the government's control.
I'll just make one note. There is a memo from city attorneys. It's at the very end of our packet. It's after the ordinance, and early on I missed it because I thought the ordinance was the end. Anyway, there is a memo from Ms. Lane and Mr. Palmer from July regarding city liability and their opinion on the fact that we don't have any if we adopt or don't adopt this. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I want to thank all the public for reaching out to us. We've had quite a bit of emails on this, and I tried to answer as many as I could today, so I apologize for the very short answers, but there's a lot. But one of the things that we didn't talk about and nobody wrote an email on. So Ms. McLean, what happened if we separated the avalanche and landslide areas? Because the avalanche seem to be pretty marked out and well known. How are we, for lack of better terms, messing up the homeowners if we were to adopt the avalanche but not the landslide? Would that make a difference, do you think, or?
Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I think that would, at a minimum, hopefully clarify for the insurance companies that these properties are avalanche. If those new avalanche maps were adopted and replace the current ones. I can frankly see the public and getting the questions as well of why we're regulating one hazard and not the other. And I think, again, that just comes back to, I'm sorry, but the policy call for the assembly to make on that one.
I would just say adopting the map doesn't mean we have to regulate them. We could say that anyway, we got lots of, right? We could adopt the avalanche map and just say, you must notify people in this place or something like that. I'm just saying you could. I'm not advocating. Ms. Hale. Oh, before we do that, I just jumped in with this why thing. Did anybody want to say anything presentation wise, or you're all good with, we're just chatting here? Okay, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I also think that I'm looking at option 6 on page 35 and trying to kind of think about combinations of possibilities. At least one person wrote into us, and I apologize for not keeping up on everything, suggesting that rather than adopt the maps, that the assembly can accept the maps, and by accepting the maps, we are saying, yes, these are maps. They describe avalanche and landslide areas, and we do need to decide if we want to regulate further. I found that 18% slope requirement interesting. But I hope that we can think about that accepting so that we're not legally adopting them, but we are making them available to the public.
Ms. Lane, any comment on legal distinctions at all, or at this point, or no? You don't have to if you don't.
No, ma'am.
No comment. Okay. Okay. Ms. Hale, you had a follow up, or you got another one?
No,
Your hand is
follow-up.
still up.
Sorry. I'll take my hand down. Sorry about that.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I had a similar question. So after looking at this and doing some research and reaching out to people, I've talked to a lender, reached out to 2 appraisers, and then spoke with an insurance agent. And my understanding is a lender will look to the appraiser, and I'd expect staff to correct me if I get this wrong. A lender will look to the appraiser. The appraisers can say what type of insurances may be required for certain types of loans, like FHA and other types of loans have different requirements. And currently they are looking at these, or at least the one I talked to is looking at these adopted 1987 maps. I do have issue. I guess from what I've seen and heard and read, it doesn't seem, if that is the case, then adopting the new maps and now causing changes in insurance requirements, which affects who can get a mortgage. So that's the other thing. If you're in a zone that requires a certain type of insurance, landslide or avalanche, for your financing, people will either not pursue it because they may not be able to get insurance, or the cost of getting a landslide assessment is expensive. And even then the answer could be, no, we won't offer you insurance. So now if we're expanding that out or changing what people are looking to make those determinations, it just seems to me that there are areas of risk and hazard that we have not evaluated here. It just seems kind of, to me, like just patently unfair, I guess. And that the areas downtown where we've done the studies, they're going to be penalized, even though someone could be in the exact same hazard, the exact same risk in an area that was just not studied. So my question is I guess it's similar to Ms. Hales. And I guess my question is, appraisers are people not giving us feedback on how changing these maps would affect people's ability to finance? Sorry, I thought I heard you say something like that, Ms. McLean.
Ms. McLean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. That is correct, Mr. Smith. Mr. Chambord had a conversation or two with an insurance agent. I'm not sure if it was the same one, but the more we've asked, the more we just can't seem to get anyone to give, I guess, the most direct answer, really, because again, there's just so many different variables that they have to take into consideration for each property when they're trying to do an insurance or mortgage, whichever the case may be, that I don't think they're able to give us, not that they're not willing, but not able to give a strong, yes, if you do this, it will help, or no, if you do that, that will make it worse. I don't think they're just able to do that with all the variations that could happen on a single property.
What?
Yeah, and just to give you an example of the variables, is it a multifamily structure or a single home? Is it new build or is it existing? Is it refinance or an existing mortgage? Is it somebody who's availing themselves of a loan product because they're a military member, or is it a conventional, financing package? There's many and then is it a high hazard, medium hazard, or whatever? There are many variables, and it will change over time. So as the country experiences big events and the insurance companies pay out, then they tighten down on what they insure and what they make available. So the answer you get today might be different from the answer you got 6 months ago, and might be different from the answer you get next year.
Okay, you have a follow-up?
And maybe it's similar to, but just to confirm just to confirm, we don't know the impacts of the difference. I mean, I feel like we know the impacts if we adopt the maps. We don't necessarily know the impacts if we're adopting them for public information only, or some of those other phrases kind of presented in the options. We don't know how that would affect the ability for people to get financing for some of these properties.
Ms. McLean?
Thank you. That's correct.
Madam Mayor, and then Ms. Hale, is your hand still up from before, or is that for another one?
It's a new one, but let people speak before me, please.
Yep, Madam Mayor.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
And Ms. McLean, the 18% slope that you talked about has nothing to do whether we adopt the maps or not, correct?
That is correct.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not doing a good job, obviously, waving at you. I think you just answered one of my questions, which is we have no idea how just saying we accept these for informational purposes will affect the private sector, because I don't think there's a magic word they follow. I don't think any of these are, this is sort of an impossible choice. But what I haven't heard is, with an earlier topic on the agenda, we talked a lot about informing residents of the hazard and making sure that we had more tools to, in a more sophisticated way, inform residents of a hazard. I agree that there's a equity issue as far as we've studied one area and we know of a couple of other places that we could have studied. It almost seems to me that if we wanted to do something related to informing residents that they were in a hazard area, that we might then also go study other parts of town, so we could say with some certainty in other parts of town that they were in a hazard area. So I'm wondering, you talked a little bit about separating out the avalanche and the landslide zones. We know the avalanche science is a bit more predictable than the landslide science in terms of what we do as a city or what we can do. I don't, in rereading through the options that I see here, I don't see one that's really, I think what I'm looking for is something that would inform folks that they're in a hazard zone. And I'm not sure about the regulation because so much of Juneau is a hazard zone. But is there a preferred one of these that maybe gets tweaked so there is that separation between landslide and hazard? And if there is one, which one would you say that it is? And I understand that might not be clear because I'm thinking as I'm talking.
I know there are people who have ideas about tweaking these and motions and things. So I think that that's on the table. And I know Madam Mayor has a tweaky thing that she wants to talk about. But if we're still asking questions, so let's do that. And then I have a question too. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I also have a tweaky thing that I might want to talk about. And I'm just realizing, we've talked a lot about a lot of input and really detailed and really good input we've gotten from the public, and it's been hard to keep up with. We do have a committee of the whole meeting on the 18th, and if we, as an assembly at this committee of the whole meeting, can reach some kind of agreement that talks about what Ms. Huskandes is describing, notification, ways of on them, having these maps on the web, for example, and notification, and maybe uses the word accepts rather than adopts. And we put that out there. And then we do have another meeting in 3 weeks so that we could come back and actually talk about this again, and that would give people the opportunity to give us that feedback. So that's just something that I'm interested in seeing if it's a possibility with this committee of the whole.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Hale. So the question is, for some reason, CBJ adopted maps years ago, and it's just the tradition. If I understand correctly, all communities have not done that and still have not done that. And in fact, some have taken their adopted maps back. So being the planner person who knows about such things, Ms. McLean, what is because I know every community doesn't have one, there must not be a requirement, and we already said that, but there's no requirement to adopt. It's just CBJ did it for some reason, and maybe it was the avalanche reason, and then also did hazard. So what is the tradition in the country of having an adopted map like we have?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I'm not sure I could actually speak kind of nationally what the trend is.
Or Alaska.
Coming from New England, this isn't really one that I've had to deal with, at least in southern New England. So hurricanes, I got you, but Landslide and avalanche, not as much. I know when we've looked at it, we hear a lot from Colorado that they have similar type of, events there. We can certainly look into that for the next committee of the whole meeting. And I believe you're also correct. I'm not sure originally why we did the study, but I do know that I think it was 2016 or maybe even a little earlier that the assembly at that time requested through the manager that staff apply for the FEMA grants to fix the issues with the current maps. Now, whether fix means adopting new maps, the assembly didn't say that from the get-go. It was apply for the FEMA grants, do the studies, and here we are now.
Okay. Mr. Watt wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think I have good understanding on why we did maps the first time around. So in 1961, there was a big avalanche event in the Barrens Chute. And homes experienced significant damage. When you look at the historic photos, there were a few roofs were blown flat, snow burned up against houses, and it was a scary event for the community. In the 20s and 30s, we had the big mudslide events on above South Franklin Street. I think that we did the mapping in the early 70s because we had just formed the borough. And so we had a new form of government and we were figuring out things like planning and zoning and purpose and the why. And so those events were much nearer in time than they are today. If you look at the historical record on avalanches, we had something like 6 avalanches made it to Tidewater in the Barrens Chute between 1900 and 1960, and none since. So our recent experience is very different. And the last thing I'll say in response to Assemblymember Hugh Scandy's query about avalanche and landslide, I think you can split those questions and answer them philosophically differently.
Okay, thank you for that answer, because I think we have a responsibility to notify, and regulation is a whole separate thing. So I think that some of these can be tweaked, and we might be able, just from what I'm hearing from people, it sounds like we kind of sort of, at least the people who have spoken, are on a little bit of the same page that I can understand. So Madam Mayor, you have a question?
I did. Yeah, thank you. Ms. McLean, the current project area for these, I don't even know what year they are now, 2021 maps or something. Is it from about like a mile out Thane to maybe a couple miles from the federal building and going out Glacier Highway? Is that about right? And only on the Juneau continental side?
Only on the continental side. Ms. McLean?
Believe that is correct, Mr. Smith.
Not on the
They
Pacific
end up
Island.
around sort of the Wickersham area to the north there.
Okay. Do we know how much it would cost to analyze hazard across the borough?
Ms. McLean?
Though I'm reluctant to
not,
release that on any.
But we could look in, I can look back up what it was before for the grant, and then we can bring that information back as well.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I guess we're just asking questions, so I'll save my comments for later.
Right on. Okay, Madam Mayor. And more questions? Looks like no more questions. So go ahead, Madam Mayor, for now, and then we can discuss.
Okay, so I'm gonna do an attempt to try and satisfy the homos with public notification. So I'm looking at option 6, and I'm gonna remove 2 words on the last phrase, not and any. So my motion would be to repeal the adopted maps and ordinance and not adopt the Tetra Tech maps and study, and does conduct a public information outreach. And I would move this to the full assembly. And if I may speak to it, the maps are on our website right now. I think they should remain on our website. I don't think we have to say anything about that. They'll stay on our website. I want to keep it pretty generic about public information outreach. Just talking with Mr. Barr today, a simple thing might be to put in our favorite tax assessment sheets, a piece of paper that says, if you live on a slope, be aware that you may be in a hazard zone. Here's the maps, go look at them. And then I'm moving it to the full assembly. I know Ms. Hale talked about keeping this in the committee of the whole, but there's a lot of people that want to talk about this. So if we move it to the full assembly and we still get so much feedback and it's not what people were looking for, then it could come back to the cow. But these folks haven't been able to weigh in yet. And we've had a lot of people ask us, when can we weigh in? When can we weigh in? So again, so my motion is to repeal the adopted maps and ordinance and not adopt the Tetra Tech maps and study and do a conduct a public information outreach to the and move it to the full assembly.
Okay, you've heard the motion. What comments or questions or motions do you have? Ms. Wahagirak and then Ms. Huskinis.
Thank you. I like where you're going with this, Madam Mayor. I think I would still like the component that notify renters of the hazards. And then also would like to see something that is like a contiguous outreach so that it's not, we just do it now and then we're done. That, you know, that it's something, because number 5, I think it says, is it annually? I can't remember now. But that it's a regular occurring information out to everybody who lives in these areas.
Ms. Huskinis.
Madam Chair, I meant to say annual, apologize, and does conduct an annual, I apologize. Thank you for catching that. I didn't mean to do that.
Okay.
And then, so every time you got assessed, you would get a thing in your mailbox. I'm not sure how to do the renters. If you come up with a better, good idea, have at it.
Yeah, we don't do the renters now. So, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. Ms. Huskinis.
Thanks.
Comment. So now the motion's been amended to say annual public outreach. And go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question for the maker of the motion then is, if you are conducting annual outreach, why you are not adopting, if you could just clarify that, because you're telling people to go look at maps, but you're not adopting the maps. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on your reasoning.
Madam Mayor.
So if you adopt the maps, it makes it looks like we're going to do some kind of regulation. And also that was a concern with some of the homeowners that if we officially adopt them, that means something to them. But if we just have them on our website, then people can go to the website. And I don't think, I wasn't trying to get hung up whether we accepted or adopted them, but from my understanding, the adoption would not help homeowners. And I suppose you could say accept, but I just wasn't trying to go down that. They're on our website.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you. I won't object tonight, but if this was a motion at the full assembly, I would certainly be a no. I think that it ignores some responsibility we have for public safety, especially if we want to move into higher density, especially downtown housing. It's okay to notify the owner, but what are you going to do about the 40 residents of the apartment? And something happens. You know, nobody thought we would have the floods on Mendenhall, but it happened. I have deployed 3 times with the Red Cross and have talked to a lot of people, victims of hurricanes and tornadoes that never thought it would happen, that didn't build to the standards they were required to because the public said, no, we don't want to do that. And I think if you don't believe in the maps, if you do not believe the maps are accurate, don't put them on the website. People are going to look at something official on a website of a government and assume that the government supports it. And if you're going to say, we don't support these maps, we don't think they're right, but you know, here you go, take a look and maybe you want to make a decision. I think it is really wrong. But I know this is going to go out for public hearing and that's good. If it occurs at the next assembly meeting in September, it won't get voted on until I'm no longer here. So you don't have to worry about it. But I think that you have some serious, serious public relations problems by putting maps that you do not officially believe in on the webpage and say, okay, public, be aware, but we take no responsibility for anything that happens to you or your renters or any other citizens or your family. And I just think that that's shirking the responsibility of government. And I think it's just wrong.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. While I agree with Mr. Jones, we don't want to allow the community to develop haphazardly or, in direct harm's way. But at the same time, we do have property owners that own property that we owe them an answer to being able to properly navigate this so that homeowners, property owners can make decisions what they want to do with the property that they own. We don't have new multifamily housing being developed downtown. So while I understand that that would be a great concern, right now our problem is we can't get any development downtown. And so status quo is not working. The public has asked for a change. We have an opportunity for a change. There should be a better way to do this. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is not shirk our responsibilities, but at the same time, allow individual property owners to be those individual property owners, and allow them to take some of the risk. I mean, we all have some level of risk no matter where we live. And I don't think any government action is going to absolve us of that. Thank you.
I have an amendment, so you could take this little banger thing.
Madam Deputy Mayor?
Yes, Ms. Hale.
I'm sorry, my hand's been up, but I can wait until after your amendment if you like.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to go now or wait till after my amendment?
Maybe go now because it's kind of a continuous thread.
Okay, go ahead.
I did have two questions for Director McLean, but perhaps a comment or two first. I disagree. I appreciate where Mr. Jones is coming from, but I disagree that not adopting is saying we don't believe. We do believe these maps. We just understand, and this is a question for Ms. McLean, that adopting can wreak some havoc. And the first question for Ms. McLean is, I thought that perhaps Sitka had adopted hazard maps and then they unadopted them because it wreaked so much havoc on homeowners. That's question number one. And then my second question is, Director McLean, I wonder if you could talk just a little bit about what the requirements are for that hillside endorsement if there's an 18% slope, so people can have an idea of what kind of regulation people are going to fall under, for example, if they want to put an apartment building on an 18% slope and above.
Director McLean, two questions for you.
Thank you. I think I'm actually going to give that first one to Mr. Watt because I think he has a better understanding of the Sitka situation than I do. But I'll answer the second question first then. And I've already blanked on the second question. This is
18. It's about the slope, hillside slope, regardless of where it is in the borough.
Yes. So as I said, if it's 18% slope and that means existing, you already have an 18% slope and you're going to be doing some development in it, or you're creating, you don't have an 18% slope today, but you'll be creating slopes in excess of 18%. It would apply in either situation. So the property owner would have to apply for a hillside endorsement. When they do that, they submit, it essentially looks like a letter format. It's created by an engineer stamped, licensed by the state of Alaska, and it's a geotechnical analysis. That's the report they provide us, and it speaks to the soils, the vegetation, how they'll restabilize the slope once the project is complete, and just really the details of what it is and how they put it back, and to ensure that it's secure. And they'll stamp that letter as well so that they have the responsibility of the engineer behind it.
Mr. Watt, Sitka comments?
Deputy Mayor, I am not 100% sure and I don't want to mislead you. So we'll follow up on that.
Okay. So my amendment would, I appreciate this motion and I agree with it largely. I just think the CBJ should do more than an annual outreach. I think it should be required on a permit application or somewhere. I don't know where, and that's for the staff to decide, but some sort of, the motion would be to require CBJ to notify permittees of the existence of the maps or something, because what happens with these kind of studies and these kinds of things in 5 or 6 years, if it's not an ordinance, it just gets forgotten or can get forgotten. I think we have better information than we had before. Is it perfect? It is not. It is better than the 30-year-old maps, and people should know that they exist. And if it's not in ordinance, then I don't think, then it's possible that it gets lost. So something, and I, again, don't want to be too prescriptive about what the staff has to do, but something. So right now we have a code that says, if you're in this zones, you have to do A, B, C, D, to E, F, G things. So that thing would get repealed and would be replaced by a sentence that said something like, tell people that the maps exist. Okay, that's the lay person's, someone would have to write an ordinance. So boy, there's my motion, is to require CBJ to notify people who are developing in this map area that the maps exist. Aren't you doing it? Because
Mayor, well
Aye.
done.
We have an amendment on the floor. Ms. Hughes, do we have objection?
I am objecting for a question, I guess.
Go ahead, Ms. Hughes Candies.
It's not entirely clear to me, the amendment, what it does that makes it much stronger. So you're still for a world where we don't adopt the maps. We just, wait, let me read option 5 again. 5 was your, 6, you're right. I like 5, you like 6. You repeal the old maps and ordinance. You don't adopt or accept. It just lives somewhere on the CBJ webpage. And annually, you conduct outreach. And if someone's building there, you tell them that they're in
She's making
the hazard zone.
She's making a requirement of the city when you apply for a permit. Something somewhere notifies you that you're building in a hazard zone.
Okay.
But she's leaving it up to staff to make that happen, how to make that happen.
Okay. No, I don't object. I remove my objection.
All right. Mr. Smith, do you have an objection or confusion? You have a confused look on your.
I am
face.
confused. I guess I'm just kind of, I mean, I think I understand the intent of what you're going for, but I guess what does it do? Does it now do they have liability about development there?
I think with the city has information and people should know about it. And this is an active thing to do as opposed to once a year we put out a notice or something. I just want people who are going to develop in these zones to know that they are in a zone that is mapped. That's all. I just for fear that if we don't do something that's in code, that it gets sort of forgotten in a bit.
Okay.
Further questions, Mr. Smith?
No, I'm fine. I guess I'm fine to let it go. I think I'll look, anyway, I think we need to look a little further into it, but I'm fine for it for now.
Okay, anything further? Any objections? Okay, oh, sorry.
hand raised for the-
Hand raised. Are you objecting?
No,
Or
I'm
do you have a
sorry. It's
question?
it's for the future. Sorry.
Okay. All right, we will give it back to Ms. Gladysevsky because the amendment passed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the motion is now, okay, fair enough. Go ahead.
So I'm objecting for a purpose of a question, 2 questions maybe. On page 33 of our packet, I will let whoever over there take this question. We have a nice table that has the number of properties within map study area, landslide, high severe landslide and avalanche zones. Versus those that were in the severe zone, but are now out of a severe zone. In our ancient methods of mapping, it included them all together, correct? Landslide and avalanche versus this more sophisticated landslide versus avalanche. Do we know the numbers that are, for instance, in our 22 maps in a avalanche zone, but maybe they're not in a landslide zone, or do those properties not exist?
Ms. McLean?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know that question off the top of my head, but we can get that for you before the next meeting.
Thank you. And then my second question is for Mr. Watt. I think I appreciate the desire of the committee, and I share it myself. We've gotten lots of great feedback from the public, and they have been very diligent in watching this. And I do want to hear from them I feel like I've heard from them a lot, but I want to hear from them more, or for them to get a chance to weigh in on a choice once we choose a direction. I'm asking Mr. Watt, does it make sense? I don't think I've been in a similar situation. I don't particularly love this option, but I would maybe be okay with hearing public testimony on it. And if there was something else that I wanted to know what they thought of, like maybe I like 5 with a tweak. Is it insane to send 2 things that are attempting to do the same thing on an agenda? I don't think I've ever seen anything like that.
Mr. Watt?
Is that insane?
Let's see.
Deputy Mayor,
5 is.
it would be unusual to have 2 competing actionable items on the same agenda and asking for testimony in both. I think it would be awkward and confusing. I think if the assembly wanted testimony, if you were narrowing options and you wanted public comment on 2 or a small subset of options, then I think you just ask for it, and maybe you take effort to hold public testimony at a committee of the whole would be unusual, or some other venue. I think you only really put something on for public hearing and adoption if you feel like that's likely to pass with or without amendments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Watt. That is kind of the feedback I was looking for.
Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I did look up the Sitka situation, and yes, after the terrible landslide they had, they actually did some studies. They adopted the maps, and then a year or 2 later, because of insurance and mortgage issues, the assembly there unadopted those maps, and they did that with some concern, just like we have concern. But that's what I've been able to read.
Thanks for that information, Ms. Hale. Any
with my
Matt?
Oh, go. Sorry.
Talking, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And this is to Ms. Hughes Candies. I looked at 5 pretty hard too, but I went with 6 because downtown's not the only place we have problems. We have problems in Douglas, North Douglas, anywhere that there's a slope. And that's why I thought more a general public notification instead of just the downtown areas. That's why I did it that way. You just have to look at the latest flood event. I mean, it hit areas of the river that would not have been in the flood zone necessarily. So I was just trying to blanket the town with notification, and that's why I tweaked number 6 instead of 5.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for that clarification. Is there objection to the motion?
I apologize for speaking out of turn. I was starting to speak again because I was still maintaining my objection. I hadn't removed it yet. So
go ahead. Do you have more questions?
No, I just want to share a comment that Mr. Jones said if this was on the night, he'd definitely vote no. I had a feeling whatever we ended up with tonight, that I would be saying I make no promises how I would vote on the night, because I have more conversations to be had and more digging to be done, despite the vast amount of digging and conversations I've already had. I think my main objection with this, and I appreciate very much where you're coming from, Madam Mayor, is that to not adopt something but then refer to it seems a little crazy to me. But I do need to dig into the Sitka one more. I think it is, you know, when the flood event was happening, one of my first thoughts I had after it was clear that people were safe and we were looking at property damage, which was awful, but that we hadn't lost anybody, was to wonder whether it would change the tone of this at all, because lots of Juneau is a hazard zone, but it's funny how different our conversation can be, where we're saying we need more up-to-date mapping and we need more notification for folks, but maybe we don't need it with landslides, which we had a landslide right after the flood event. So it just seems like a little bit, I have some cognitive dissonance there. So it kind of doesn't matter whether I maintain my objection tonight, because like I said, you know, maybe I'll remove it just to be nice. But I can make no promises. And I think it's worth for us to think about, yes, we should look at Sitka. Yes, we should think about whether we're limiting places where we need to build housing. And that would be my main reason for maybe not wanting to regulate it. But I think it's got to make sense for all the hazards in the borough. So I don't think it makes sense for us to be really concerned about a river hazard and not concerned about avalanches and landslides. So I'll say that and I'll remove my objection.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes-Candies. Mr. Smith, do you object?
Yes, for the purpose of comment. And that's just that with the mayor's last statement about the public information, I feel a little more appeased. Again, we have assessed the hazard risk of like a little square downtown. And if we start saying, oh, send it out to renters that live in that risk, and we do that, we're unfairly impacting people that are in that study area without studying the risk across the borough. And I think that is just unfair. So, I mean, we've had landslides that came down Wire Street by Twin Lakes. We had a landslide. I mean, there was flows through Mountainside Estates, Douglas. I mean, there are risks throughout. And I'm okay with this because I think it's a least worst option. But if we are starting to regulate people based again in this little sliver of town that the only place we've studied, that just seems unfair. And I will probably oppose that all the way to the end, but I'm okay with this one going forward and hearing from the public. Thanks.
Thank you.
My objection.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We often are picking the least worst option sometimes. Any other comment? Ms. Wahagidak.
Yeah, I just have to go back to the renters, notifying the renters of the hazards. What was your reasoning for leaving that part out, Madam Mayor?
Madam Mayor.
Just a simple one. I didn't know how to do it. Yep. So if you come up with a great idea, it'd be perfect. But how do you do it?
I'll just comment that I support this. Part two, we got some great comments from and extensive, well-researched treatises from people. And I'm interested to hear what they think about this option and how that affects their property. And so that I'd support here, putting it to, I actually liked the idea of bringing back the COW, but I'd like to hear, otherwise, if we do that again, then nobody talks again. So anyway, I support this. Any objection? Ms. Hale, you have your hand up. Do you object?
No, I don't object. I just wanted to respond to Ms. Hughes-Candies, if I may.
Okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to state that by not adopting these maps and not regulating these areas, I don't see that that's fundamentally different than what we're talking about on the river. We have mapped these areas. We want to let people know that there are hazards. We talked about the inundation maps that will be doing the same thing. So I see those, I don't see any dissonance there. I see those as us making our residents aware of hazards. So I very much support this.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Appreciate that. All right. Hearing no objection, this will be moved to public hearing. And we're going to take 5 minutes. Thank you. Thanks to everybody who's sent in comments and came by. We'll call the committee of the whole back to order and go to our fourth item, which is number 5 on our agenda, AELMP update. And we have Alex Mesdag here, and that's all. Nobody has anything to say. Mr. Mesdag, we have your presentation, and go for it. And if you want to introduce other folks with you, please do. Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you. Alec Mesdag, I'm the CEO of AELMP, and we have been trying recently to get in here at least every couple of years, just kind of give an update on what's happening at AELMP. So thank you for having us here tonight. Just moving through the slides pretty quickly because I know it's getting late. First slide here, and there's a lot of info. We posted what's posted with the packet includes the notes on each of these slides. So if you want to follow along there, this first slide just kind of reminds everybody where the different hydro generation resources are, and the black lines indicate where our transmission lines are. So very appropriate. We just had the conversation about hazard maps because there are a lot of hazards along those black lines. And, we have tonight, I brought most of our management team is here. So this is who we are right now. Since the last time we were here, we've had 3 retirements. So Connie Holbert, who was at the company for 26 years, she retired at the end of last year, and I took over for her. And then, and I think Connie's probably listening right now, because even when she was coming back from Europe a while back, she told me that she read all of our reply testimony in our rate case. So she's definitely keeping tabs on us still. And but here with us tonight, we also had Chris Yoros, who was our generation engineer, retired. Brian Farrell took over for her. He's in the back there. And Rod Albrandt, who was our former IT director, had also retired in 2022. And Ron Duval has come on to take his place. And then, also with us tonight, Daryl Weatherall is our transmission and distribution engineer. Debbie Driscoll's the head of our consumer affairs and HR. And so when you see the Facebook updates, that is her posting, probably huddled under her covers at 3 a.m., making the updates for us. And then Brandon Colum has been our CFO for 6 years. He's here tonight. And Lori Soa she took over my former position with the company, Director of Energy Services and Metering. She started just about a year ago. So thanks for having us all. Just a little reminder on our corporate goals. We get asked a lot, if we do need new energy in the future, where's it going to come from? I like to remind people that one of our goals is to provide reliable and safe service from electric energy generated from renewable resources. So that is one of our goals. And as things change over time, we intend to stick to that. We also are very focused on trying to provide among the lowest average electric rates of major regulated utilities within Alaska over the long run, while maintaining financial integrity and utilizing electric resources efficiently. These are all, things that are difficult to accomplish all of them at the same time. So it takes a lot of work to try to reach those goals or maintain our performance related to those goals. Little update on where things are at. We've had, it's a good water year. We're above the rule curve. So this curve just kind of represents where the lake should be in order to maximize generation over time. And one of the things that's really important to note about this, and one of the real constraints with the hydro resource that we have available to us, is that from that period, from about November to June, we only get about 1/4 of our inflows into the reservoirs, but that's when we sell about 2/3 of our energy. So there's clearly when it gets cold out, when it gets dark out, we use more electricity, but also less water flows in. So it's a little bit of a constraint where we really have to rely on storage, which is an expensive part of the project. Big projects going on this year. Our biggest project is replacing the Annex Creek penstock. So Annex Creek was built in the 19-teens, and the steel pipe that carries the water from the reservoir down to the plant has been there, is the original one. So it's been there for well over 100 years. And Brian has cut the top half of that off, and it's been hauled out, and they're working on hauling the new pieces in place. So the intent is to replace the first half this year, the second half next year, being sure to have the plant online through the winter, and then get the whole project done next year. So this is really a pretty major project. I think with some of these older plants, you get to the point where big pieces have to get fixed, and those fixes are expensive, and like in this case, will not actually make any additional energy available. So this is a project that will really just hit rates, right? When that goes into service, it will hit rates. And I think that's one of the things that is just kind of important to understand about these hydro projects. We talk about old hydro being cheap, and it's like kind of old hydro is cheap. Really old hydro starts to become expensive again as you need to maintain what you have, and some of those bigger pieces eventually just reach their end of life. In our transmission system, we have a number of things different things going on. So we are working on, trying to see what opportunities are available with the various, Infrastructure Act or Inflation Reduction Act programs that are out there. It's not very often that an investor-owned utility is eligible for some of these grant programs. So we are excited about having the opportunity to do that. That is one of the things about, not usually being eligible means that we aren't actually very good at applying for grants. So we're working on getting some help there. But we do intend to apply for one of these GRIP grants, hoping to see if we can underground additional sections of the transmission line, the parallel transmission lines that run along Thane Road. So there's one section undergrounded. When DOT shoots that works on control work in that avalanche chute, we move all of the energy to the underground line, so that if an avalanche comes across the road and knocks down the overhead line, it doesn't result in an outage in town. If we could underground that section and then in a couple other areas, it would just increase the resilience of that line. Daryl has been working, Daryl Weatherall, our transmission distribution engineer, he's been working a lot with Docks and Harbors on, just kind of thinking through what it's going to take to build out the infrastructure necessary to connect docks at the CPJ cruise ship docks there, or connect ships at the cruise ship docks. So that's an ongoing and complicated process. And then they're going to be doing some work on using LiDAR to try to do a better job of developing a vegetation management plan. So just another one of those things to help increase the resilience along the SNET line, which is where most of our energy is flowing into town. One of the things that we keep track of is pretty closely is just, how many new services are we getting? How much growth is there? How many new customers are coming online? And you can see that residential services have been, sitting in that kind of 50 to 60 range for quite a while. And then we get, a handful of multifamily units, in any given year on average. And we, seem to be kind of on pace.
Stand by. We have a question. If you don't mind being interrupted in the middle of your deal.
Oh, is that
Go
okay?
for it.
Okay,
Yes,
sorry about that. Thank you. I just wanted to check. So these are residential services that never had been served before. I mean,
these are new residential services. Yep.
Okay.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a new, say, single family home, right? That can be just a service that is metered as a residential customer. So according to our residential tariff. So it could be someone building a new detached garage that requires its own service.
Thank you.
New commercial services. So we get typically just a handful of these each year. Last year, there were a few large commercial services that it isn't normal to have, quite that many. That I think probably a couple of those were healthcare facilities. But we do see, still just kind of continued things popping on. And then one of the things we like to point out is just how we're doing on reliability. Now, over time, we have been increasing the reliability of our system. So decreasing the total average amount of time that every customer experiences as an outage. So, one way to look at this is if you took all of our outages that happened, even if they affected a few people, if you kind of normalize that to one big outage that happened in town, how many hours was the power out across the whole town? So it's just taking all those little outages and summing them as though they were one big outage. And, year to date so far, we're at about just under 1 hour. So if all the little outages that have occurred so far this year were instead replaced with one big outage, we would have been out of power for 1 hour. And you can see that our 5-year average is just under 4 hours, where the national average in 2021 was a little over 7 hours. So we do pretty well when it comes to overall system reliability.
That was my question about comparing, because it seems like other utilities are out for a week and sometimes or days and all the stuff in your freezer. And that hasn't been my experience in Juneau. So you are confirming that you're more reliable than whatever. I'm not going to name a name, but
Yeah, yeah. So if you just look at, looking at the national average, we are definitely more reliable than the national average.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I was actually noticing as we were getting ready to talk about ALMP that this has been a great year, that we haven't had many power outages. Although I was remembering a couple years back, we seem to have more power outages, and I see the spike. Could you maybe just speak briefly to what caused that spike and what changes you made to bring us back down to the great time period that we have now?
Mr. Mestag.
Yeah, thank you. The spike occurred, I think that was a year where we had some ice storms and trees coming down through transmission. So we had some larger outages that took quite a while to really get all the trees removed from. So sometimes we can have big outages like, I think I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, when there were some really terrible winds, took out gobs and gobs of trees out on Mendenhall Peninsula Road. And those folks were out for, I think, a number of days, right, before power was fully restored out there. But that's such a small number of customers that the way that it impacts the statistic overall is not very greatly. But, in whatever year that was, 2021, when it impacts the transmission system, it impacts a far larger number of customers. And so then it hits our statistics much harder. And I think one of the things kind of note here too was that year was pretty bad. There was a long outage, in particular on one day when a number of trees came through the transmission. I think we were 5 hours at least just on that day. And compare that to 2008 when we had the avalanche that took out the SNET transmission line, because that affected just one line and one, remotely, rather than in a more complicated area of the system, right, kind of near downtown. It was a little bit easier to just go ahead and get that portion sectionalized off and then start up the diesel generators in town. So the overall outage wasn't very long, even though the impact of the community was much greater. So in this case, it just happened to be kind of where the trees fell that caused the statistic to jump so high. Okay. And then we're working a lot on improving our metering system. So we have started installing, for the last number of years, we've been installing AMI meters. So these are meters that are able to communicate more quickly and provide more data than the older style that we have been replacing. And so we're right now just about a little over 50% deployed. And one of the advantages is for things like you see in the graph on the right there, being able to look and see, for some meters, they're 15-minute interval data, some meters it's an hour interval data, but getting to see, so if you called up and you had a question about your energy use, you could call up and talk with probably Lori and find out some really detailed information about what may be going on at your house. She can help you kind of diagnose what might be causing your bill to be too high with greater accuracy than before. So sometimes someone will go on vacation, come back and find their bills higher than they wished it would have been while they were out of town, and they want to know why. And usually, those sorts of things can be somewhat visible with the increased granularity in the data that we get from our meters. One of the other things, that I note on this slide is if you look at that evening peak, you can see how how high it is right around dinner time. And that is when we experience our system peak. On a daily basis, our highest loads tend to occur at dinner time. And so one of the reasons that we put together our off-peak electric vehicle rate, it's been available since 2017, is to try to push some charging into evening hours. So if someone drives home straight from work and plugs in their car that's got a 6 kilowatt charger or higher, then if you program that car to delay charging to later in the evening and you're participating in the rate schedule, you can cut your cost to charge your vehicle by about half. And you can see that the people who are participating in this program are not spiking their charging during our evening peak, right? So they're moving into an area where we have additional capacity, where we have a bit of a lull in the system, and that allows us really to get more utilization out of equipment that we're already paying for.
What are the hours of that electric vehicle rate from what time to what time?
So the hours that are available are from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. And most vehicles, one thing you can notice here is you can see that the 2 hours, the 11 and 12 a.m., those are the hours that have the highest amount of energy sold. And I think that's because many of the vehicles, when you program them, they program to have a start time for charging. And most vehicles, because they're only using in the order of 10 to 15 kilowatt hours a day, and are charging on a 6 kilowatt charger, are going to finish their charging within the first 90 minutes to 2 hours, 2.5 hours, somewhere in there. Some of the vehicles like the newer Chevy Bolts will have a complete your charging by this time setting. So that's how I have my Bolt programmed. And so it completes by the end of that window. The program has been fairly popular. Most of the participants are folks who are using the rental equipment that we provide. So if someone wants to participate in the program, they can use equipment that we rent out. And then, part of the benefit of having an electric vehicle in Juneau is because our rates are low. And you can see here, this is the 2022 numbers for a number of the larger utilities in Alaska, as well as the US average. And the number that you see there, that 12.35 cents, also takes into account that we had an interim 4.5% rate increase go into effect in September of last year. So even with that last portion of the year being at a slightly higher rate, we still fell well below the US average for cost of electricity per kilowatt hour for residential customers. Oh, no, this is, for residential customers. We did file a rate case last July. The interim rates went into effect at a 4.5% increase in September, and those have been in effect since. And then just last month, we had a hearing to go over the remaining issues in that rate case. And, our rates are regulated by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska. So we went up for the hearing, presented our case. There is a Office of Regulatory Affairs and Public Advocacy in the District Attorney's Office that represents our customers. And so they made their arguments about what they thought our rates should be. And then the commission will take until October to decide and issue a final order, which will determine what our final rates will be. Our rates will be somewhere between no increase and 9% increase. There is no, it could fall anywhere within that range. So I can't really speak to what the commission will decide.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. Well, you can't speak to what the commission is going to decide. Are you able to speak to what ALMP's request was and what the Public Advocacy Office, what their answer, what they thought the rate should be? Can you speak to if they were similar? Were they far off?
Mr. Messick.
So I can answer that question probably in very great detail or less detail. And I think that's probably
Less detail is good. And then you guys could talk offline.
Yeah. So the less detailed answer is that ALMP requested a 9% increase to our annual revenue requirement. And the RAPA's starting point in our discussion, or starting point for what they thought our increase should be, was something in the neighborhood of 1.5%. And so it will fall somewhere probably between 1.5% and 9%. And our interim rates at 4.5% are refundable. So if there was a decision by the commission that would result in our rates being lower than 4.5% over the time that we filed, then we would issue refunds for the difference.
Thank you very much for that. Excellent. You're good. Ms. Euskadis.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on that, is there a limit on, are there table steps to that on what you can request per year?
So there's a statutory formula that we have to follow when we submit a rate request. And so in essence, yes, right? So the way, and again, this is one of those things that has a very long answer,
yes,
or a very short answer. So basically, we follow a formula when we submit, and then there are certain pieces within that formula that have more room for argument.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Mesdag, for being here with your staff. And I have to do a shout out to all the linemen out there. Anyway, so why 9%? Why are you looking for a rate increase of 9%? Does it have to do with the pen stock, or what does it have to do with?
Thank you. That is a great question. So really, it's just it's a combination of investment that we made from 26, our previous rate request increase. Our last general rate case was filed in 2016, and we had not filed a general rate request until last year. And we were required, in 2016, we were required to file no later than 2021 on a 2020 test year. But because 2020 was a strange year for some reason, we requested an additional year. And so we filed in 2022 on a 2021 test year per a stipulation agreement that concluded the 2016 rate case. And in that time, basically what had changed for us was a certain amount of inflation of expenses. And then, some additions to plant, nothing that was really, no big gaudy thing. It was really just an accumulation of just, the constant investment in the system that is required to maintain, to keep it working as we want it to.
Mr. Smith has a question.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. So as we've been getting more familiar with inflation over the last couple of years, is the cost of electricity something that we should always expect to just be going up? Or will it, and does it track with inflation or other things? Or anyway, just wondering what we should be expecting. Yes.
The way that our rates work is we pass through all of our expenses to customers, and then we recover our cost of debt, and we recover taxes, and we earn a return on equity on the shareholder capital that's invested in the system. So, it's a combination of and then there's depreciation of the assets. So all of those costs are recovered, and then we earn a return on equity for the shareholder dollars that are invested in the system. And so as expenses go up, right, those just get passed through. And obviously, when we invest in the system, when we invest capital in the system, we do it with a combination of debt and equity. And then, the assets are going to depreciate over time. So the amount that we invest in the system is going to be offset to some extent by the amount that the existing assets depreciate each year, right? So over time, in general, the expenses go up. And the cost of the things that we're building to replace the things that are no longer, are at their end of life, or the improvements that we're making because of new things that are being built, those things tend to add to that rate base, all of that need for capital investment. So in general, it tends to go up. We did have obviously a rate decrease in following the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So that lowered our federal income tax rate. And so we reduced the component that is included in rates for income taxes. And that created a rate decrease in 2018.
Thank you. Go ahead.
All right, so just looking at where our energy sales have been, we don't see, so we have firm and interruptible energy sales, and about 20% of our energy sales are to our interruptible customers, and mostly to the Greens Creek mine. And that basically, that additional revenue for energy that would otherwise go unused plays a significant role in keeping our rates lower than they would otherwise be. And our firm loads are growing slightly. So what we've seen over the last 10 years is about a 0.5% of compound annual growth in energy sales among our firm customers. And if we project that forward and assume that we have steady sales to interruptible customers, you can see that we're still well within our ability to serve with our existing hydroelectric resources for quite some time. And so at this point, we do not have anything identified, any new plant identified in a report that we submit to the RCA every 2 years that, where we have to list any planned capacity additions or retirements. And right now, you know, obviously we look at this and understand that things can change and things can ultimately, you know, start to change quickly, perhaps. So what we do to that end is just try to ensure that we have a number of different things in front of us that will allow us to respond appropriately.
Mr. Mesdag, I have a question. This is your lines for projected are, I assume, just regular Juno needs. And as you know, there's talk about electrifying several more cruise ship docks.
Mhm.
And how does the load of a cruise ship compare to how many houses or, you know, is it a lot? And where is that in your graph? Or what does your graph look like if you added that?
So basically, I think that red line would move up slightly. So if you look at the study that was done, the dock electrification study, it creates it lists some estimates for the amount of energy sales that would occur if we had, you know, both docks electrified and optimized scheduling. And I think it topped out in the neighborhood of I can't remember off the top of my head, but probably in the neighborhood of like 8 to 10 gigawatt hours a year. And our total sales, you know, are around 400 or a little over 400 gigawatt hours a year. So it's not an extremely large amount of additional energy. But when you look at kind of where we're at and where we have been, we sell most of the energy that we can sell in an average water year. So, and then obviously there's variability to that. And then we discontinue sales to interruptible customers based on a priority schedule, depending on the availability of energy.
So is that 8 to 10 gigawatts for 2 ships or 1 ship or 3 ships or do you
I think that
remember?
was the from the dock electrification study, that is kind of the rough order of magnitude that was predicted for an optimized scheduling for both docks being electrified.
For 2, so for 2 ships. For the 2 city docks.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So just to be clear, do you have capacity to serve that or do you not?
There are times where we would have energy available and there are times where we would not have energy available.
Which is why they're interruptible or one
Exactly.
reason they're interruptible. Mr. Bryson.
As you were talking about facilities coming online, going offline, newer facilities sometimes cost less than older facilities. Could you maybe bring us up to speed where you guys at with the relationship with Juneau Hydro as they were trying to also create energy here or electricity here in Juneau?
You know, if it's all right with you, I do have a slide on that a little bit later and I could keep going through and address it then.
That'd be great.
Perfect. So, you know, we are looking at changes in the system. So one of the things, this is one of the very nerdy slides that I'm going to go through. So this is something that Lori's been working on. And really what we're looking at here is, are we seeing increasing energy use year over year as temperature on cold days? And that's essentially what this is looking at is it seems to be the case that we're seeing increasing energy use on cold days. That's basically what you're looking at here. So each year there's more energy used on cold days than the prior year on average, right? So that implies that there is growth in space heating load. And some of that might be, you know, because we don't see a lot of, on an annual basis, a lot of increasing energy consumption. You know, one of our thoughts is that we have people who are converting from oil to heat pumps, and that increases the amount of energy that we sell. And then we have people who are converting from electric resistance to heat pumps, and that decreases the amount of energy that we sell. But heat pumps do not perform exceptionally at very, very cold temperatures. So at very cold temperatures, we're seeing higher loads, even though our energy sales aren't growing really, really quickly. And then here, you know, when we see on those very, very cold days, we're seeing more energy being consumed because those heat pumps that have offset resistance are not performing really great relative to resistance like they do at warmer temperatures. And then this is a graph just kind of indicating how even the same model of heat pump can have varying levels of energy over time. These are separately metered heat pumps that were installed as part of the Thermalize project. So we are keeping a close eye on heat pumps. We're doing another study to determine exactly what are the impacts of replacing electric resistance in the main living area of apartments with a heat pump. so that we can understand what sorts of tools might we have at our disposal as time goes on to address growing space heating loads that are other than the very, very big expensive infrastructure projects. We see growth in the public charging stations.
Mr. Smith has a question.
Oh, yeah.
We recently discussed on-bill financing at a committee of the whole meeting. And we understood it, that's not something ALMP is interested in pursuing. Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. The on-bill finance is complicated. And one of the big obstacles, and I did spend some time working on trying to see how we might be able to make it happen. One of the big obstacles is in the law that enables utilities that are regulated under AS 4205, which is AELMP, which includes AELMP. We are required, if we were to offer an on-bill finance program, we are required to offer a warranty for the improvements for the life of the financing. And in many cases, this doesn't appear to be something that exists. So the intent, I think, of that was that when this legislation was reviewed by Department of Law, they were concerned about the transferability of debt from one customer to the next. So the idea with on-bill finance, and one of the greatest potential benefits of it, is the ability to transfer the debt with the account, because whoever is living at that location is theoretically the person who will benefit from the improvements. And the Department of Law determined that that would not be appropriate unless the person who originally assumed the debt also provided a warranty for the improvements for the life of the financing. And even though they intended that only to exist to cover that issue of transferability, the statute requires that it is offered to anyone who participates in the program, even if they do not intend or do not elect to make the debt transferable. And so that is a pretty big sticking point.
Thank you. And so the warranty on one of those heat pumps doesn't match what a typical on-bill financing like repayment schedule would be.
So I think that there's, again, a short answer and a very complicated answer to that. So the short answer is it's not. The improvements that I think are probably offer the best payback often include things that would not be easy to warrant. So there would be things like, there's a lot of improvements that you would, so say you went through the home energy rebate program with the state, they'd be looking at improvements to the performance of your envelope. So air sealing, insulation, windows and doors. And, the best energy many energy improvements are not discrete like a heat pump. And then I think another problem is that ALMP is unlikely to want to implement an on-bill finance program to support oil to heat pump conversions because of the impact that may have to customers who are not able to exact that improvement for themselves. Because, if someone who is in a single family home and is doing very well financially and can make those improvements, their bill will go down. But if we start having to construct new infrastructure to support increasing heating loads, then those costs are going to be borne disproportionately by people who live in low-income multifamily housing with electric baseboard heat. And I think that it feels problematic to us to implement a program in that way.
So if I understand you, you might be interested in that for converting resistance heat to heat pumps, but not oil to heat pumps. Is that correct?
Yeah, we would be very interested in trying to ensure that we're able to respond to growth in a way that allows us to maximize utilization of the infrastructure that we're already paying for. So this graph, this graph is also, I was kind of teasing Lori because of how complicated this graph was.
Excuse me, Mr. Mezek. Michelle Hale has her hand up and I have missed it. So go ahead, Ms. Hale.
Thank you. If I could just return to the previous slide, I think, where you were talking about not this one, though, even the one before, you were talking about the change to the heating load and the heating load increasing and heat pumps being inefficient or less efficient at very cold temperatures than resistance heat. Is that extrapolating? Would you say that people who have heat pumps add resistance heat at those very cold temperatures, or is that just too much of an extrapolation?
So I think I either I misspoke or I wasn't clear enough. My meaning about the performance of heat pumps at low temperatures relative to resistance is more like this. When it's 30 degrees outside, heat pumps perform substantially better than resistance. And then when it's 0 degrees outside, they perform very slightly better than resistance, right? And some of them perform very well, even down to those temperatures too, or even lower, right? But once it starts to get down into very, very low temperatures, their performance relative to resistance does decrease.
Got it.
So that's my point there. Not that they aren't still outperforming resistance in most cases.
Great. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for the question, Ms. Hale.
And
Go
if
ahead.
I could add one more question about heat pumps, if I may.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Mesdag, you've just been talking about on-bill financing and not wanting to subsidize or I can't remember the word you said, offer on-bill financing for people converting from oil to heat pumps. Anyway, you were talking about that, and I understand what your reasoning is. But at some point, and it may be sooner than we think, because there is such a push to electrify, we are going to hit that point where we are needing more power. And there's a lot of people in this community that want to electrify just as much as possible because people are so concerned about the climate. So what will AEL&P do when we hit that point where we don't have enough power, and how long do you wait?
Mr. Mesdag.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we are, one of the reasons we're spending so much time trying to learn about heat pumps with participation on with Alaska Heat Smart, with the Thermalized Juneau project, with the study that we're undertaking on our own to learn about how heat pumps can offset resistance in multifamily housing. Those are all things aimed at understanding how do we model what this transition is going to look like, and how will it impact our planning for as we plan for new needed infrastructure. And definitely one of the things I would really like to find is I'm very interested in finding ways that we can make more room for those oil to heat pump conversions and for electric vehicle conversions that don't require us to build the most expensive assets in response. So we know that energy efficiency and conservation are often the cheapest ways to reduce the amount of energy that is required. So if we can much more cheaply do things like go out and install heat pumps into units that have electric resistance heat in order to reduce the amount of energy that we have to sell to them, then that energy is available for sale to others. So in our planning, we need to first understand what is the potential for that in the community, what is the cost for that in the community, and how does that compare to just going out and, putting up bigger wires, replacing old conductors with larger conductors, and replacing old transformers with larger transformers, and building new generation facilities to bring new hydro online, and then building new diesel generators to accommodate the higher loads for when the hydros are unavailable because we have issues with landslide and avalanche risk on our transmission line. So it's a complex problem that involves a lot of parts and pieces. And I mentioned in the text in the notes that accommodate the slides that there is the single increasing space heating loads is the one change that has the greatest impact to our need for new infrastructure, right? So that is the thing that will cause us to need to invest in new infrastructure faster than any other change. And so one of the reasons that we encourage trying to lead our electrification efforts with transportation is that the nature of that load is more compatible with the infrastructure that we already have. And that is definitely the lower cost path towards trying to electrify and more loads that are currently served from fossil fuel emitting sources.
Mr. Mesnick, I just want to make sure I understand. So you're saying that increasing electric vehicles that charge at midnight is better than not?
It is far simpler for AEL&P to serve those loads with the nature of our hydroelectric resource and our existing infrastructure. It is far easier for us to accommodate fuel switching with vehicles than it is for us to accommodate fuel switching with space heating.
And just to follow up on Ms. Hale's question about the whenever you get to some new infrastructure, is the next step Lake Dorothy Phase 2, or is it something else?
That would simply depend on how, what is changing in the system and what is the appropriate response. So there are projects that are smaller, something like a small run of the river at Sheep Creek. That might be one way to respond. There are larger projects like a Phase 2 of Lake Dorothy. That might be another way to respond. It would really depend on what is the nature of change in the system and the requirements in the community.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Let's see. So this is just showing public charging stations here. And you can see that there's increasing use over time at them. And one of the things that we are, going towards that conversation of trying to accommodate fuel switching where it may be most easily accommodated by the existing infrastructure that we have. We are interested in, and we've been kind of working with the manufacturer of our meter supply, the manufacturer of our meters to utilize our existing meter collection system. I'm hoping that they can build an electric vehicle charging station that will allow us to use our existing meter collection system to make public charging available more broadly across town. And that's something we continue to work on. We're working on incorporating more electric vehicles into our fleet. We have a couple Ford Lightnings on order for our meter department. We've been waiting for them for a long time, and hopefully they will actually come. But I think it is important that we, do to the extent that we're able to lead by example with the vehicles that we're driving. And, I mentioned before that we are very interested in getting information out there. So here are some examples of some of the communications that we have put together over the last year. So there's lots of educational material. We work a lot with different groups in town to provide educational opportunities for students and, get information out to the public in general. And we had a question earlier about where we're at with JHI, and actually, you may notice if you were to go back and look at our presentation in 2021, that there are a number of slides here that I have just reused because certain things don't change that quickly at the utility. This is actually a slide that I reused because not a lot has changed since the last time we were here. There's essentially hasn't been any change in where we're at with the interconnection process with Juneau Hydropower, other than because a lot of time has passed and some things have changed in the system since the system impact study was completed in 2018. I notified Juneau Hydropower last October that we needed to update that study to reflect current system conditions, and I have not received a response to that request at this point. Also in 2018, following the initial system impact study, Juneau Hydropower started work on a facility study, which is a third of the studies that is required to complete the interconnection process, and that has not been completed to date either. So that is where we stand now.
Person has a question.
So where is the RCA in this? Did they request? I take it they requested these 3 studies and they set the time frame for these 3 studies. How does the Regulatory Commission or the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, what are they saying about this, for lack of a better phrase?
Mr. Mesdag.
Thank you. So because AEL&P does not have any power lines that cross a state line, we are not regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission with regard to this type of transmission interconnection. And we do have hydro plants that are regulated by FERC, but not for this type of interconnection. And the nature of this interconnection is also not something that is regulated, regulated by the RCA. So this interconnection is just, we're using an industry standard process to accommodate the interconnection request by Juneau Hydropower.
Excellent. Thank you.
There are certain requirements, but they don't like apply specifically in this, with the nature of this interconnection isn't.
Thank you. I received a message from Miss Hale. She got kicked off the meeting and it doesn't look like she's able to get back on.
Okay,
Oh,
Thank-
thank you.
thank you. Thank you for noticing. Did Mr. Smith, you had a question?
I did. I was just curious that, and maybe it just got answered there in that who determines when a system impact study needs to be revised or redone or whatever.
So according to the terms of the agreement that we signed, it's per prudent utility practice. So basically, we determine based on our understanding of what has changed in the system that for prudent utility practice, it needs to be updated because the conditions have changed significantly or to the extent that it is prudent to update it. I think I would like to add too that when I said that they don't regulate the process, it is the point that the RCA would have to approve the agreement. So if we go and sign a transmission services agreement or an interconnection agreement, because ALMP is economically regulated by the Regulatory Commission of Alaska, we would have to have those agreements approved by the Regulatory Commission before they could go into effect.
Mr. Smith, so this is a kind of a complicated chart with small print. And if I understand the overall message, there's not things that need to be done are in, is ALMP needing to do something or is JHI needing to do something to complete this boxes?
Yeah, right now the ball's kind of in their court, right? We don't have any specific action items at ALMP related to the JHI interconnection.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We do talk about additions and subtractions, additions and retirements. Oh, thanks. I saw it blinking. I wondered. Like we mentioned in the last time we presented in 2021, we are planning to retire the diesel generators in the Gold Creek plant. And then also following the replacement of the Annex Creek penstock, we will be replacing the original upper portion of the Salmon Creek penstock in 2025. So those are that Salmon Creek project is another major project that we have coming up, and we do intend to, we're working on putting together, assembling a grant application for a DOE Section 247 grant that would help reduce the cost of that project. And when we, I didn't mention this earlier, but when ALMP receives a grant for a project like that, all the benefits of that grant flow through to customers because it essentially just reduces what would otherwise go into rates.
Madam Mayor, are you pointing at you or you? Then Madam Mayor.
Yeah, just curious on ALNP and relationship. Are you able to partner with Clinton Hyder or DIA for Indian energy grants? Or is that not applicable because are you a for-profit or not?
We are an investor-owned utility, so I don't know the answer to that. I do know that there were some opportunities that AML was communicating with us about recently, and I think Lori has been trying to follow up on those.
Madam Mayor.
So the Salmon Creek penstock, is that the one that you're going to try and replace with a slightly larger penstock, which would give you a little bit more capacity? I don't remember.
So you are correct that when the upper portion of the Salmon Creek penstock is replaced, it will be replaced with a larger diameter pipe, which will reduce the losses in the pipe, which could mean that there is more energy available to be produced at the plant. And so we are exploring whether or not that, or how much might be available or what upgrades might be required in order to take advantage of those reduced penstock losses at the plant.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. I'm probably going to phrase this or frame it really incorrectly, but I think at one point, Mr. Mezig, we had talked about, you were kind of exploring like if there was a way, I mean, I get that there's kind of a weird incentive for you as like a utility that's selling a thing and to like now pay somebody to put something in their house that will reduce the things that you sell. I mean, you have like duties to shareholders and stuff, but you had talked about like a way maybe there was some type of proposal I thought about where you might be able to use that, if you pay for an installation that's going to reduce someone's power, that could go towards like the cost of equity piece. Is that ringing any bells, or am I just like
so what I was talking about was, the idea that if it is cheaper to install an energy efficiency measure compared with building a new generator, right, then would it not be better for all customers to do the lower cost option? And kind of the way that we're regulated, it tends to point towards build the big thing. And so my hope was that we could identify, and this is part of what we'll be looking at with the heat pump study, is to really do a good job of quantifying what are the energy, what are the benefits, costs, and benefits associated with that very specific type of improvement. And if it means that we could make additional energy available for other uses at a much lower cost than building a new generator, would it be allowed by our commission for us to recover costs related to that type of program? And so that is something I'm interested in doing, because I think that provides better community benefits, more broadly provides community benefits than just going out and building the biggest thing. And I think it's really important to note that the only way that ALMP makes money is by building new things, right? We invest capital, and shareholder, with a portion of that is funded with shareholder equity that earns a return, right? So it's only the portion of shareholder equity in rate base that earns a return. So if we don't invest in new capital, right, and then our earnings go down over time. And that's important, because when I talk about wanting to delay as long as possible the need for new generation, I am also saying delay as long as possible us making a lot more money. And the reason I say that is that we have been here for 130 years, and we want to see this community succeed. And the way to do that is to have stable energy prices. And when you look at the communities in this state that have very, very high energy prices, they do not have as vibrant of an economy as Juneau does. And so a lot of the things that we love about this place are in part aided by the fact that we have affordable electricity. If we change that dramatically, it will not only change that for our economy and the people who live here, but it will also, because we are one of the rates that is used to calculate the PCE, it will, as our rates go up, they go up in 156 communities across the state. So we're very, very, one of our goals is to remain among the lowest average rates among major regulated utilities in Alaska. And we want to do that because we feel it is very prudent to do that. So the delaying that new infrastructure piece is saying, how can we just be the best stewards for our community, because that is in our best interest for the long term. We don't have a particular market sector in Juneau. We have Juneau. That is our customer, really, when it comes down to it.
Appreciate it. You're done.
That's
Do you have
all I
more?
got. Yeah, we love getting questions. There's lots of folks who are there to ask questions.
I have a question.
Ms. Hale, you're back. Okay, go ahead.
Yep, sorry, I got bumped there for a while. Hey, and Mr. Mezdag, thank you very much, and I appreciate what you're saying about keeping rates low. And I just perhaps can ask how you also reconcile that discussion with the climate and the drive by many to get off heating fuel for their heating source in order to help the climate, as especially as we've seen many disasters this very summer, including here in Juneau. So there's a responsibility to Juneau and a responsibility to the state, but also a responsibility to the world. And how does AELMP reconcile those?
Mr. Mestag.
Yeah, and I completely agree that it is important for us to respond to climate change by reducing our emissions. I think we do not dispute that at all. Again, it is a corporate goal to serve our customers with renewable resources. And really what we're saying is that the path towards reducing our emissions matters, right? So when you trying to avoid the very complicated answer when it comes to nerdy electricity questions, but in general, it is a much better path, more financially feasible path for us to pursue emissions reductions by leading the charge with transportation, because the nature of that load makes it easier for us to accommodate the space heating load over time.
Any more questions for Mr. Mesdag at this time? Thank you for coming and thank you for all this great information. And I'm sure if people have more questions, they will contact you.
Please do. Please call if you have questions anytime.
Thank you for keeping our electricity on. I saw your flying pipes this weekend. I was at Sunny Cove and saw pipes and beams and things, and like they must be doing something. So rarely do I find the pipes were. Thank you. Okay, we have one more item. It should be short. Forward. Doing that to myself. Resolution 3034. We heard from staff, we don't have to do this before the deadline, but Madam Mayor has a motion.
Actually, I don't have a motion. I just want the will of the body. I'm not talking about the resolution tonight. This resolution came from Public Works. They were thinking that we needed a special assembly meeting because public comment closes on September 3rd. But since then, we've talked to staff and they said it's not as important. So I was going to have Mr. Barr talk and then just get the will of the body, whether we still want to do a special assembly meeting or not. So Mr. Barr.
Mr. Barr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A little bit different information since the last time you and I talked, Madam Mayor. I've been chatting with the South Coast Director at DOT. His advice is that we can avoid the issue of being late to the game on public comment with the formal resolution if we can submit a sort of preliminary bit of public comment by the deadline, which we think we can do because we have the resolution drafted. Although if the body wants a dramatically different resolution than what you're considering, then that might be challenging. So I think that's what I have for you. Thank you.
Okay, so does the body object to a letter being written along the lines of this resolution? Anybody? No objection.
Wait, sorry.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you. Instead of the resolution, I mean, I think Mr. Barr said that DOT.
Immediately to have staff write a letter along the lines of the resolution and then pass the resolution on September 11th.
And the letter will indicate that maybe even have a copy of the draft resolution and indicate that this resolution is coming from the assembly.
Yes, ma'am.
And DOT says that's good enough.
Mr. Barr is nodding his head.
Okay, I'm all right with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
And we can pass it as early as September 6th because we have a finance meeting that we could do a special assembly meeting. Beforehand. So
okay,
get it in as early as the 6th. I just was seeing if we needed to have the special assembly meeting or not, but it doesn't sound like it as long as we do a letter. Is that correct? Okay.
Thank you.
So then could we do one on the 6th? Do you want to plan for that? I mean, we'll be meeting, so it'll take
10 minutes.
5 minutes. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to express that the will of Public Works and Facilities, we wanted to absolutely make sure that this resolution would be considered in the STIP. That's why we were going to propose the special assembly. But if Mr. Barr is assuring us that they will still accept this even after that deadline, then I think that satisfies what Public Works and Facilities is trying to accomplish today. Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair of Public Works. Thank you so. Okay, hearing nothing further, I'm going to bang the thing. We're adjourned.